Jackson. Absent. Richard Westwood. Absent. Yalthea Baker. Absent. Bobby Hill.
Here.
Kimberly Jones Williams. Absent. We have 5 members present. Sorry. Yes, 5 members present.
Thank you very much. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to preclude us from meeting safely in a public forum. We must therefore continue to operate in this virtual fashion using the public comment guidelines outlined by the Louisiana Attorney General. Here are the public comment rules that we will follow today. At the beginning of the meeting, staff will read the agenda for today's meeting in its entirety. That agenda is also online at council.nola.gov. We will then recess for 10 minutes to allow citizens to submit written comments for any agenda item. Anyone wishing to comment should go to council.nola.gov and fill out an online public comment form. Only written public comments will be accepted. Public comment will be limited to 1 comment per person per item. Comments should also be limited to 2 minutes when read aloud and be germane to the agenda item at hand. Public comment will be closed at the end of the 10-minute public comment period. No written comments will be accepted beyond that point. Before voting on an agenda item, council staff will read any public comment received for a pending agenda item. Mr. Carter, can you read the agenda in full, please?
Recess to receive public comment. Agenda item 3, approval of the minutes of the November 24, 2020 meeting. Agenda item 4, expert panel update. Agenda item 5, initial report, discussion among commissioners regarding CCSC initial reports. Agenda item 6, stakeholder engagements, update on stakeholder engagements thus far and those scheduled in the future. Agenda item 7, other matters. Agenda item 8, public comment and initial report, fulfilling the requirement of motion N2070 that the commission shall be required to hold a public hearing of its initial report within 1 month of its issuance. And agenda item 9.
Thank you very much. And with that, we will recess for 10 minutes. Andrew, what time should we return?
3:14.
14. Thank you.
Got on mute. That's been 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. One second. All right, commissioners. The remainder of the agenda will be our first quorum discussions on the listed items. Commissioners, your feedback is welcome as we progress. I'm sorry, Andrew, could you remind me, we had quorum before we went to recess, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So I don't need to recall, you don't need to have the roll recall. Okay, thank you. Approval of the minutes. Commissioners, you received a copy of the minutes from the November 24th meeting. Are there any corrections or questions? Hearing none. Andrew, are there public comments?
Not on this item, no.
If there are no corrections, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as distributed.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and properly second that we, approve the minutes as distributed. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item 4, expert panel update. Our expert panel has consistently and diligently continued researching New Orleans streets and have updates and recommendations to share based on their ongoing research. I want to thank Sue Mobley and Thomas Adams and their team. They have been thorough and responsive throughout this process, and as they have reaching the conclusion of their duties, I want to make sure that they are thanked because they have done tremendous work. Thomas or Sue, which of you will go first?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Commissioner, and thanks all commissioners for being here, and hello to folks watching. Yeah, listen, we have a very quick update. We have submitted to the commission a report addressing some concerns that have been raised by various groups around the city about some of the names that have been identified. And I want to quickly summarize both our response to those names because I think that will have an effect actually as y'all go forward today as well. But also first, just to recap a little bit about the process of how these streets were identified in the first place. Again, I think as perhaps we have a larger audience than we have had today, it might be a useful thing to do. The original identification of streets occurred in July 21st, 2015 with a Times-Picayune story written and created by Dan Swenson and Gleg LaRose, with support from the urban planning scholar, Dr. Jacob Wagner. As part of this process in 2020, the New Orleans Public Library did additional research on each street and identified their presumed eponyms, eliminating some streets like Polk Street in Lakeview, through the alignment of that street with other presidential streets that had been spaced throughout Lakeview. Us as a panel of experts then also went and reviewed and expanded upon this list as well, identifying additional streets that fit. It's important to also kind of have a sense for folks to understand, right, that we're drawing on a large variety of secondary and primary sources. There are at least 3 books out there that trace the histories of New Orleans street names. And in particular for some of the streets that have come up in the last few weeks about their the origins, Donald Gill's The Story Behind New Orleans Street Names has been particularly prominent, as is a pamphlet produced by a longtime New Orleans local community historian, Leonard Huber, entitled Lakeview Lore. To move forward really quick, in responding to some concerns, particularly around the streets, and particularly those 4 streets in Lakeview, Walker, Mouton, Lane, and Bragg streets, we began delving a little deeper into the layout of Lakeview, as well as the origins of some of those streets' names, or at least the most plausible origins. And again, it's important for folks to realize the extent to which none of this is written down. There are no archival records of particularly, especially whom these streets are named after. But scholars take meaning in very much in what things are placed next to each other, right? And so one thing we noticed in going closely into kind of the Lakeview layout is first in regard to Conrad Street. Now, Conrad Street didn't appear on our original list of recommendations, but it seems very clear that Conrad Street is named for Charles McGill Conrad, who served as a U.S. Senator from Louisiana from 1941 to 43, was later in the U.S. House of Representatives, later served as Millard Fillmore Secretary of War, and was an original drafter and signer of the Confederate Constitution. So one recommendation we put forward to the commission today is that Conrad Street be added to the list of streets to be renamed per clause number 2 of City Council's motion M2170. But Conrad Street's an important point in this larger discussion as well, because it is grouped with a series of other streets, including Walker Street, including Mouton Street, and including Downs Street. Now, Walker, Mouton, Downs, and Conrad all have one thing in names very prominently in common, and they were all very prominent Louisiana politicians of the 1840s and 1850s. So in this case, both Downs and Mouton is already discussed in our initial report, and he of course remains recommended for renaming. Downs had passed away by the time of the conflict of 1861 to 1865. So his name should, of course, in the ordinance's language, stay up. But Walker, we came to realize, of course, is not named for the original suggestion, which was a very kind of plausible suggestion in the prevalence of generals for John George Walker, nor is it named for a relatively obscure Texas Ranger named Samuel Hamilton Walker. It is, in fact, again, keeping with the combination of those 4 streets, named for John Marshall Walker, a longtime member of the Louisiana legislature, who was also governor of Louisiana from 1850 to 1853. Moving on really quick, I want to address Lane Street, which is the other one that is somewhat in question, or has been, that some folks have questioned. Lane Street appears and has always appeared in pretty much every map. And again, it's also important to remember that maps produced before the early 20th century of this part of the city were aspirational. This is pretty much underwater, right? So they are maps as part of laying out of a process of imaginary real estate development that, again, it's not going to occur in some cases for 2 generations. Nevertheless, Lane Street, where it appears and when it appears, is almost always in between and next to Bragg and what was Twiggs Street. And both Bragg and Twiggs share with Walter Pay Lane two important commonalities. All 3 were at the Battle of Monterey in the Mexican-American War, and all 3 were Confederate generals. And again, it's those 2 commonalities that we're convinced that means that the street takes its meaning in large part from Walter Pay Lane, even if there is a slight possibility it might have originally been named for Joseph Lane. And again, I would emphasize too that given the argument about certain commonalities, both in relationship to the Battle of Monterey in particular, but also the Mexican-American War, it's much more plausible that Walter Pay Lane is the name honored on those streets. So again, to recap that, we are advocating that, or suggesting that Walker Street be removed, but the street basically 1 block to the north of it, Conrad Street, be added. The Lane Street, of course, remain. The Mouton Street, of course, remain. No questions have been put forward to Mouton, in fact. In the course of doing this research, though, we also went back and, again, tried to kind of explore the development of that neighborhood in particular. And we really went down the kind of rabbit hole of looking at Charles Loic. He was a lawyer, and he was very instrumental in building out the neighborhood of Lakeview. He also in 1864 left college to serve fight in the Confederacy, in the Louisiana Guards and in the Washington Artillery. He also spent a good portion of his life as one of the leading proponents of lost cause ideology in the early 20th century, perhaps that kind of particular invention of history's height, if you will. And of course, he's also instrumental in building those streets in Lakeview. So we have suggested as well, recommendation number 3 that we present today, that Loic Place be added to the list of names to be renamed per clause number 2 of City Council motion number M2170. And finally, right, in the kind of broader deep dive we went in to look at this stuff, we took a look at the 1855 I'm going to butcher this, Manouvre's 1855 map of Carrollton, Greenville, and New Carrollton. And this contradicts the explicit claim in Donald Gill's Stories Behind New Orleans Street that Leonidas Street was named for Leonidas K. Polk. We suspect the name now is of the Greek origin, as some people have suggested. And again, that original claim that it came from Leonidas K. Polk is citing that secondary source of the Donald Gill book. Given that the street was on the 1855 map, it's highly unlikely that it honors Leonidas K. Polk. Therefore, we suggest that Leonidas Street be removed from consideration. I think that's the summary of that report. Oops.
You're on mute, Carl.
I'm happy to answer any questions the commissioners may have about that as well. I think I provided you all with a longer detailed copy of that, but again, I'm happy to go into detail.
Carl, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry. I was saying thank you very much, Thomas. I was asking if Sue had anything to add before I go to the commissioners and ask for their questions if they have any.
I mostly wanted to express appreciation for the report that we were given by the Lakeview Civic Improvement Association and for public comments along the way that encouraged us to dive deeper into primary sources. I've found new maps of the city, which always makes me happy. And that is precisely what public comment and a public process is supposed to do. So thank everyone who contributed to sending us back into the archives.
Thank you very much. I'm going to echo that as well. That's, you said that's the whole purpose that we had the public comment out there. And this is one of the instances where, as Commissioner Sturpko, who's the representative for District A, can attest, it was helpful and meaningful. Are there any questions from the commissioners for either Thomas or Sue? Any comments from you all in general about the recommendations?
A deep thank you for your really tireless work and research, and thank you very much.
Yes.
Retweet.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just said retweet. Thank you.
Yes.
I want to thank the Lakeview Civic Association too for diving deeper into this. To echo Sue's comments, that's exactly what this process is all about.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. If there are no more comments from commissioners, we'll move to the item number 5. But I want to thank Sue.
Commissioner Connor, we do have public comment for this.
Yes, I'm sorry. Well, first, go ahead with the public comment. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay. First comment is from Andy O'Brien, not a paid representative. Proud of the team and the project overall for finding and removing toxic lost cause ideology from our streets and elevating heroes of our history of struggle for justice in their place. Next comment is Beck Levy. I support the renaming of everything associated with the legacy of white supremacy, including the Confederacy. There is no valid argument, not a preservationist one, not an archival one, not a historical one, that could justify preserving and uplifting this legacy of hate. I also support dropping charges against the people who removed the John McDonough statue free of charge earlier this year. So should you. Be daring for once. There isn't much history left for you to be on the right side of. Next comment is from Bruce R. Hofford Jr. There are 2 footnotes in the criteria for renaming policy. I accept the definition of white supremacy in footnote number 1, and I reject white supremacy. And I suspect a strong and substantial, solid majority of all white folks in the city do too. And I suspect many of you do not recognize that because you don't want to recognize that because it likely doesn't suit your narrative and agenda. Punish present-day white people for the sins of white people in the past whom we never knew. Commissioner, the ends to eradicate historical vestiges of white supremacy do not justify the means, changing present-day street names. I don't reject or accept your footnote 2, except to say that if that footnote is a basis or premise for your existence as a commission, then your existence is not properly justified. That one man's, Mr. Francis Ansley's, broad definition of white supremacy is not shared universally for sure. It's a wide bet and a clearly agenda-driven to ensnare as many white people as possible and convict them of violating his definition. It is a setup to capture more white people and create guilt where it shouldn't exist. Again, I didn't own slaves, nor did my family. You folks are the divisive ones. Try and be fair, please. Next comment is from Gwendolyn Midlow Hall. Born in NOLA in 1929, growing up tormented by the huge statues of Confederate generals on horseback, I am proud my city is taking the lead, honoring our heroines and heroes of all colors who fought for democracy with a small d. Thanks to all of you. Next comment is from David Newman. Please take this unprecedented opportunity to advance the renaming of all 37 streets in this report. The dozens of street names were given to honor generals, supporters, and financiers of the Confederacy and other racist causes with no accident. It was part of a deliberate, deeply constructed effort to perpetuate the power structures of antebellum society by subjugating and effectively enslaving African Americans through segregation, exploitation, mass incarceration, Jim Crow laws, and fear. Any street name or monument that continues to celebrate the architects of this truly shameful period in our city's history is a middle finger to every African American citizen or visitor to our city, as well as anyone who truly believes in or fights for the causes of equality, equity, and justice. You have an opportunity to correct a small part of this dark moment in our city's history, and instead bestow honor on truly heroic figures who resisted slavery and Jim Crow through escape, civil rights advocacy, and celebration. To see transformative culture bearers like Leah Chase, Professor Longhair, and Tweety Montana so honored would be especially welcome. New Orleans Place is a unique, historic, culturally rich destination city did not come about because of a bunch of Confederate traitors. It came from the constant, grueling, often deadly work of resisting, in ways sometimes obvious or visible, sometimes not. The legacy of the Confederates and their lost cause men. Don't sleep on this already past due chance to honor them appropriately. The next comment is from Grace Hopper. I request Palmer Avenue be renamed to Earl Palmer Avenue. The next comment is Scott Ellis. I am Scott S. Ellis, author of Madame Bouquet, The French Quarter in the 20th Century, and The Faubourg Marigny of New Orleans, A History. The commission has recommended that Governor Nichols be renamed for Lois Ellie Sr. While Mr. Ellie was noteworthy, I feel that a street in the quarter should be renamed for someone who was instrumental in the life and preservation of New Orleans' most famous neighborhood. I have put forward the name of Clay Shaw, 1913 to 1974, since he was one of the leaders of the modern preservation and renovation in the quarter, and a plaque on that street honors him. Also, the city has never tendered an official apology for the notorious and frivolous prosecution of Mr. Shaw by Jim Garrison. Lastly, to my knowledge, there are no streets in New Orleans named for openly LGBT people, and renaming this street for Mr. Shaw would be an acknowledgement of the importance of that community and the life of the quarter and the city in general. The next comment is from Eric Skinner. I'm especially looking forward to the renaming of Lee Circle and Robert E. Lee Boulevard. Following the storm in 2005, Leah Chase opened her restaurant and opened her arms to our group. Honoring the people who lift our city in times of need is a no-brainer. The next comment is from Timothy Favreau. I object to the renaming of Sem Street. The commission is not sure who it is named for. The commission states that the two individuals' names being those for whom the street may be named were brothers. That is incorrect. They were cousins, not brothers. If the commission got that basic fact wrong and is not even sure who the state was named for, how are we supposed to have faith in the quality of the commission's work? There are other upstanding individuals named Sems for whom the street may have been named. Leave the name alone unless you develop accurate information. The next comment is from Joan Feebleman. Please, please, please approve the Palmer Avenue be rededicated in honor of celebrated native drummer Earl Palmer. Earl Palmer is our namesake that best represent the diversity of our beloved city more than any other name suggested. Neighbors envision with excitement a street celebration of the renaming of a street to honor Earl Palmer, including his family and members of our vibrant music community. All of the vast majority of Palmer Avenue residents are in favor of our streets being named to honor Earl Palmer. 7 generations of my family have lived on the street. Many of the current residents have lived here for more than 1 generation. There is very little turnover of residents on our street as most are longtime family homes. We are deeply invested in this neighborhood, not on our way somewhere else. We thank you so much for your efforts in this endeavor. We respectfully request your approval of this joint consensus of our neighbors that Palmer Avenue would be rededicated to honor Earl Palmer. Many thanks, Joan Hooper Fieldman. Charles Marsala. Last night I submitted via email a 20-page plus comments with many pages consisting of images. It consists of 4 parts. Part 3 deals with using a few examples of challenges I would make to the experts that wrote the report. While I do not have a PhD, I do travel the state of Louisiana research into history for a travel app and TV show I produce. Recently, we received a Suncoast Regional Emmy nomination for a story we did on the World War II Museum in the nostalgia category. We are nominated for an Oscar by the American Italian Foundation, a Russo Brothers program for a documentary we are doing on the New Orleans Sicilian history. The experts frequently use the word treason in describing the conflict of 1861. Others call it a secessionist movement justified by a violation of Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Section 8, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, excises, to pay debts, and provide the common defense and general welfare of the United States, but all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Frequently, between 1816 and 1861, all duties, imposts, and excises were not uniform throughout the United States. The expert report reviews John Calhoun, who resigned as vice president to fight the tariff abominations, which South Carolina had argued the state could declare an unequal tariff null and void via nullification act. However, the report omits any discussion of this part of American history, nor does the report review the moral tariff as a reason. Nor does the report advise that the state of Louisiana had a public vote on secession and voted 52% to 48% to secede. Since there was no trial of treason and no conviction of treason, the experts are expressing their opinion. We know 60,000 Italians and Sicilians migrated to New Orleans from 1880 to 1920. We know they were not treated well. In fact, there were 4 lynchings of Italians in the 1890s. Yet there does not seem to be an expert on this commission reporting on the Italian migration problems as required by the City Council motion. I'm nearing completion of 8 episodes of 30 minutes each for my TV show, Celebrating Culture, and that's 2 minutes. Next comment is David Harms. I'm delighted the city is intentionally engaging with questions of what elements of our history we choose to glorify. I'm embarrassed to describe my home as 3 blocks off of Jefferson Davis Boulevard, a beautiful street named after a monster, and I'm looking forward to no longer needing to do that. The next comment is from Rick Heatherly. I would first like to thank commissioners for volunteering their time. However, it's become apparent that in its eagerness to suggest new street names, the commission has neglected to adequately perform its first responsibility, which was to conclusively determine who the existing streets were actually named after. I understand that the commission has relied on some professors and library staff to perform research for them. But as the appointed representatives of the people of this city, your job is not to simply rubber stamp their conclusions. You should ask questions and scrutinize their work, and you should educate yourself about the work you have been tasked with performing. If you have done so, for example, you know that General Taylor Street can be found on official maps in the 1850s and local newspaper articles published several years before the Civil War had begun. This fact is completely undermines the commission's claim that the street was named after a Confederate general. The Confederate General Richard Taylor was not even a general at the time that General Taylor Street first appeared on local maps. No special expertise is required to uncover this obvious error, and it should cause each of you to pause and question the depth of research that was done to determine the actual history behind the current street names. I realize this is a thankless job, but it is a job each of you accepted, and it is your names there at the bottom of the report. The public deserves a process that is transparent, intellectually honest, and based on facts. Of course, it is certainly easier to just shrug and simply rely on whatever findings some researchers handed you, but facts should still matter. And if citizens present you with facts that challenge the initial conclusions, you should publicly ask questions and demand answers from those researchers. As the appointed representatives of the people, that is your job. The next comment is from Lisa Birch-Gott. Apologies for pronunciation. Dear Street Renaming Commission, I want to emphasize the importance of replacing New Orleans streets and park names honoring people who sought to maintain elite dominance of the city over the 19th and 20th centuries. Doing so will not simply help erase the insult felt by many of those making their way around New Orleans today. In completing a more ambitious project, the panel of experts has presented a wide range of actors, most of them forgotten, whose places in conflicts dividing the city during the period demand recognition. Proposed names include labor organizers with some presciently operating in sectors such as domestic work, developers of New Deal programs, direct action civil rights proponents, and activists fighting for fair distribution of public goods. One of my own favorite prospects, the writer James Newgas, proved that the effects of New Orleans life were not limited to the city, its region, and the United States. His service as a voluntary soldier for the forces in the Spanish Civil War, fighting for just economic reallocation, has been driven in part by his roots in a wealthy New Orleans manufacturing family and the class divisions exploited and sustained. In short, as the powerful report produced by the panel shows, this renaming of streets and parks will compel awareness of the complexity of New Orleans history, as well as spur ideas for creating new models of art and political organization. Sincerely, Lisa Birch-Gott, PhD, History, Yale University. 2015. Juliana Perron. I wholeheartedly support the report produced by the experts. I'm a historian of slavery and emancipation. In particular, I study the ways the promises of Reconstruction, freedom, equal rights, and social belonging were undercut and betrayed. Long ago, historians and other scholars came to understand the way the lost cause ideology was used to not only undercut abolition, but also how the presence of Confederate statues, memorials, and names served to reinforce the diminished social positions of Black citizens. While some civic leaders, including in New Orleans, have begun addressing the injustice by removing large prominent statues, it is equally imperative that the smaller, more insidious celebrations of Confederates and white supremacy for which they stood be eradicated. Renaming streets is part of the necessary work. I encourage the Commission in the strongest possible terms not to let this moment pass without taking action. You will not only be on the clear right side of history, you will be standing up for the right of every citizen to live in a city that does not diminish or demean. The next comment is by Diane Honore. I strongly support this process as it is long overdue and necessary in a city to which so many have contributed to its cultural and economic growth. most of whom have been overlooked and tucked away into the recesses of our archives. It is high time to balance New Orleans' storied past and tell a balanced account through street names, monuments, plaques, and historical markers, at least as a beginning. As a tour guide since the early 1990s, and being the descendant of the first French, indigenous, and enslaved here in New Orleans, I am asking that these changes occur to honor the past. As a masking baby doll and Black Indian queen with the yellow Pocahontas, I stand in full support of the renaming of Tulane Avenue to represent Allison Big Chief Tootie Montana. He was a true innovator who changed our history by changing the Black masking tradition itself through his historic trade. He is also a civil rights leader who died fighting for the rights of his community in the council chamber. The out of Mardi Gras on Mardi Gras Day to see him, not just his neighborhood. He also played a significant role in being a descendant of the first documented tribe and carrying on the original musical rhythms of the Black masking tradition. Tootie Montana Day was proclaimed by the council to be January 6th after his death. It is still celebrated each year by his family and the Indian community at his statue and around Treme in the 7th Ward. Naming a street after him would give voice to his legacy. I also recommend naming a street monument to retired General Russell Honore, as he saved the city of New Orleans post-Katrina. I realize that people name the deceased, but how can one not consider the magnitude of what he did during one of the most difficult, disastrous times in our beloved city? The next comment is Katie Smith. I am thrilled at the work the Street Renaming Council has done to come up with creative, respectful, and powerful alternatives to the New Orleans street names that have for years upheld a history that doesn't reflect the strength and diversity in our community. The research should be applauded and the results should be adopted. I live on the corner of Leonidas and can't wait to tell people I live on Mahalia Jackson instead. Let this be a city of righteous celebration. The next comment is from Rain Fertel. I commend the commission for taking the first of many, many steps required to transform our streets, parks, and shared public spaces in order to more justly reflect the history of our city. The next comment is from Kelly Wolf. I firmly support the position stated by Ned Benjamin on the renaming of Palmer Avenue. There have been several names and positions proposed, but logic needs to be included in resolving these issues. Please consider the opinions of the residents who live on the street as top priorities, since they are the ones most affected. The next comment is from Tracy Gambato. Apologies for pronunciation. Lee Circle should be renamed for Tuskegee Airman Calvin Moret. General Taylor, rename it Colonel Young after Army's first Black colonel. Calhoun, rename it Du Bois Street after W.B. Du Bois. Next comment is by Trey Babbitt. I would like to know if the expert panel has reviewed the 1865 map that was submitted to the commission earlier today. The 1865 map that was surveyed in 1864 shows the name of streets that are on the list of streets to be renamed in Lakeview. The fact that the expert panel takes the position that these streets were named after heroes from a war that was still in process of being fought is difficult to comprehend. Civil War did not end until 1865. Also, if they've made any changes to the recommendations concerning Washington, Park Square, and General Taylor Street. And that's all the public comment on this item.
Thank you very much, Andrew. We're going to vote on the recommendations from the experts on the next agenda item for you all's well-being. So we will move on to item 5, the initial report. Last meeting, we voted on initial recommendations. We have continued stakeholder engagement meetings since then, and we'll consider recommendations from the public, our experts, and council members as we move forward prior to filing the final report. You have a copy of the initial report with included recommendations by our experts. I will entertain a motion to accept and incorporate the changes as discussed by Thomas Adams a moment ago. I will just as a refresher remind you that those recommendations included adding Conrad Street and removing Conrad Street and Loke Streets to be added, removing Walker Street and Leonidas Street. So I'll entertain a motion to accept those recommendations.
Carl, I have a question.
Yes.
What if we want to accept some and not accept some? Is that?
Yep, that's fine.
That's okay?
Oh, most definitely, yes, yes.
Okay. Well, then I would like to make a motion as District A representative to accept Walker Street and Leonidas. But I would like to defer decision at minimum on Conrad and Luke Place. And the reason for this is because I just received this morning, and I just received the report this morning, and I really haven't had a chance to study it in any meaningful way. And given the back and forth that we've had to this point on these streets, I'm just not prepared before I do my due diligence to recommend that additional streets be added to the District A list.
Is that, and that's in the form of a motion?
So the motion would be to accept removal of Leonidas and Walker and defer decision on Conrad and Luke until such time as, I mean, maybe this is personal to me, but as the District A representative, it is me, to further study the expert panel's recommendations on those two streets.
Is there a second to this motion? Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. Are there any other motions on the floor? No other motions? Okay, hearing none, then we will basically have agreed to defer these to a later point in time. So also from the initial report, has there been any other, or are there any other rather suggestions regarding the original vote that we took on the 24th of any changes or amendments that any commissioner would like to put forth at this time? Okay, hearing none, we will move to one second. So on the,
Carl, just for clarification, so
yes,
there was a motion to adopt, and then there was a request by Commissioner Sturpkow to amend that motion. I'm just not.
his actual motion was to accept the removal of Walker and Leonidas streets from the list,
Right.
but defer decisions on Loke and Conrad. And you know, to that, I'll say again, you know, anything that we vote on now is an initial recommendation, subject to change at any point, you know, even beyond our final report, obviously. So, you know, that voting on it today isn't anything final, just to be clear. So if you know, we can choose to let it go, but I think that Walker and Leonidas, it's clear, at least from what has been given to us by the experts, shouldn't be on this list because they don't fit under the ambit of the ordinance. So that being the case, I think that part of the motion is an easy one to talk about. The other two, I understand Commissioner Sturpkow's saying that he needed to study the information given more to understand it. I've read it all day to day, and they both fit under the ambit of the ordinance, but I understand his request to defer. And we have, you know, we have a little time because the final report from this commission, I think we have about another month left before that is to be turned in. So within that month, we can revisit this, obviously. You know, so does that help?
Yes, but I wonder, given that if we should accept the recommendation of the expert panel, as their research has, you know, with the research that they have provided to us.
Yes.
And then should there be further, you know,
action on that, yes.
action on it between now and then. I just wonder if we shouldn't do that.
Yeah, well, so the floor's still open there, and a motion, I can't make one as a chair, but what I would suggest would be this, that we make a decision on them based on the advice given to us by the experts, that the streets, Loke Place and Conrad do fit under the Confederate portion of this, of our charge, and that being done gives the public a chance to comment on those over the course. It gives more time for them to comment on that, right? If we wait until 2 weeks from now to do it, we'll have less than 2 weeks for them to make any comment if they have any before we have to turn in our final report. So I agree with your train of thought that, doing something today probably provides more opportunity for conversation as we move along. I would ask though, if Thomas would chime in here and briefly state the reasons why both Conrad and Loke do fit.
Certainly. Look, and I would also say that Conrad is very connected to removing Walker in a kind of in a logical way, right? To accept that Walker honored the Louisiana governor, which I think is fairly apparent to me, means to also accept that Conrad honors the only Conrad that anyone has ever suggested it honors, which was also a prominent Louisiana politician. In this case, though, Charles McGill Conrad lived through the time of secession and the Civil War, went and helped draft the Confederate Constitution, signed that Constitution, and levied war against the United States in contradistinction to Article 10 of the Constitution. In terms of Loic, again, it's fairly straightforward, and no one suggested Loic was instrumental in laying out the area of the city that has a relatively short 1.5 block long street bearing his name. No one suggested it honors anyone else. He owned a good portion of that land. He was a lawyer with the firm. And in fact, as far as I can understand, the largest shareholder of that firm that developed present-day Lakeview. And Loic fought in the Civil War from 1864 to 1865 on the side of the Confederacy. So those are the two people. And again, I would also emphasize that to a certain degree, that to accept that Walker is this Walker, right? Is the Walker that also was a fairly straightforward acceptance, right? That the layout of those streets, Conrad, Walker, Downs, and Mouton, right, all share one key characteristic, right? Which is prominent Louisiana politicians elected to the two highest offices in this state in the 1840s and 1850s. And again, it seems fairly straightforward in a kind of logical consistency way that those four, again, share that. They have, again, there's Downs and Mouton, and what's my third one there? Downs, Mouton, Walker. Downs, Mouton, Walker, and Conrad. Only one of those names even appears in anything close to related to the Mexican-American War, which is the counterclaim, and that's Walker. And again, it's a different Walker.
Okay. Commissioners, anyone, or Sue, do you have something?
I just wanted to offer a point of clarity as well. We did not receive the 1865 map that was mentioned in comments until about 10 minutes before this meeting. But just to clarify again, that nobody was surveying Lakeview in 1864 because there was no Lakeview in 1864. The maps from this time period are aspirational. There would be no houses or streets laid out until the 20th century. In that neighborhood, it was swampland at the time.
And I will add one more caveat to that as well, which also speaks to one of the public comments on General Taylor Street, which is to say that, General Taylor Street would fit under this as well. And we're one to find, right, that these streets, in fact, that someone aspirationally identified these streets and say even 1859, right? The fact remains that the people that they are honoring, right, after the fact, right, did actions that fit within the ordinance, right, which fit under Taylor, right, fit under Lane, fit under Mouton, right, and so on, and fit under Conrad in this case, right? So again, the timing of this is not necessarily the important part, right? The point is the historical figure who we can be fairly certain of which they honor and the actions they took in the second clause of the City Council's ordinance, right? The actions they took from 1861 to 1865, and then in other clauses of the ordinance, actions they took after the war as well. But in this case, it's 61 to 65.
Thank you very much.
So for one more point of clarification, the point that we're discussing right now is names that fit on the list to be changed.
Yes,
The names to be adopted is a separate conversation.
yes, to replace them.
Yes.
Yes, would be a separate conversation, although as you likely saw in the report from the experts, they were suggesting that the name Jasper, which was previously associated with Walker, be shifted over to Conrad because it's in the same geographic location. And then there are two other suggestions for Loke, which I was going to get into if we,
Right.
adopted them and went forward today. So I'll talk about those if we need to as we move forward.
So, I believe, our primary task here is to determine those lists of names that fit this criteria. And I believe that our expert panel has developed the research that, documents the fact that these names deserve to be on that list. And, should there be something that is, discovered between now and when the final report is due, they can bring that, to the commission's attention. But I think we should adopt this new recommendation.
So is that a motion?
Yes.
Okay, so just to be clear, your motion is to adopt all four of the recommendations?
The recommendations, which would include the names to be taken off.
Yes.
And with new names to be included on. So.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and properly second that the recommendations from the historians, expert panel rather, be adopted. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Andrew, do we need a roll call on that or just? Yeah.
Yes, there definitely needs to be a roll call. on that.
Yes, yes.
Here.
Paul Serco,
I can't hear. Is that me?
Yeah, that's you.
Nay.
Carl Connor,
Yay. Who did he call?
Yep. Sorry.
Gia Hamilton.
Gia.
Oh,
Okay.
yay.
Kevin Jackson, William S. Jackson, and Bobby Hill.
Yay.
Yay.
Oh, Kevin.
Kevin's here, yes.
Kevin's here now?
Yep. And voted yay.
Alright. 5 yeas, 1 nay. Motion passes.
The motion carries. So that being said, the suggestion was made by the expert panel as well that we, again, shift Jasper from Walker over to Conrad. And then on Loke Place, which is in the Navarre neighborhood, the suggestion was that we consider Michael Mizell Nelson, a professor of history and public historian who began his career at Delgado and provided New Orleans with some of its most critical institutions and resources for remembering working class history of our city. Mizell Nelson was a co-founder of New Orleans Historical and the Hurricane Digital Memory Bank, as well as a lifelong activist for social justice. He passed away in 2014 at the age of 49. Another suggestion was Melanie Diefendahl, a longtime and much beloved professor of sociology at Delgado. In 2003, she founded the Irma Thomas Center for Women in Search of Excellence. She received Delgado's Seymour Weiss Excellence in Teaching Award in 2017. Diefendahl also worked in the Vietnam Veterans Family Support Program at LSU Health Sciences Center and was honored for her work by several organizations, including the Mayor's Military Advisory Committee, the Military Order of the Purple Heart, and the Vietnam Veterans of America. She passed away in 2020 at the age of 68 of COVID-19.
Commissioner Connor, can I, sorry, because we had promised 3 and we really got this request a couple hours before. And again, we're in keeping with our idea of tying to the neighborhood.
Yes.
The two you read both had close connections to Delgado, which is just a few blocks away from that street. So that was the reason there. But we did draft a third, and I'm happy to read that. Or I sent it. I sent it to the. I know folks don't usually have their SRC emails open. So during this, this is Charles McKenna. Charles McKenna, who was an Irish immigrant and a founding member of the New Orleans Mechanics Society in 1806. Mechanics Society worked across the city's crafts to make sure that the numerous skilled laborers in New Orleans received good wages and better working conditions. He rose to president of the Mechanics Society by 1833, the year he, like so many other Irish immigrants who worked on digging the nearby New Basin Canal, succumbed to the deadly cholera outbreak. So that was the third name. We drafted again the last couple hours for that.
I appreciate that and thank you. And commissioners, I will say, I open the floor for motions about these suggestions. However, I completely understand if you want to make a decision at a later meeting. We'll have to discuss with Andrew the next time we can actually meet on the council's calendar. But I do think that over the course of the next few weeks, we will probably have to meet at least 2 more times to make the adjustments that we need based on the feedback that we're getting, not just from the experts, but today's public comment, as well as comments that we'll receive from the public going forward and also from the council members going forward. So if you want to make a motion about those names today, you're welcome to do that. But also know that we will plan to have at least, unless I'm told differently, 2 other meetings prior to having to turn in that final report.
I want to make a point of information. There's a McKenna Street in Broadmoor, so we need to look at that. There's an existing street called McKenna.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Turco. Are there any motions with regard to the naming those 2 streets, or to deferring that, or?
I would
It's the
recommend
commissioner's pleasure.
that we defer that, given, the expert panel had literally, minutes to pull these together and just give us, and I'm sure we will receive other comments, just give us a little more time to digest that.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Moved and properly second that we defer assigning names to the to Loke and Conrad Streets. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and we will defer this until the next meeting. In the meantime, I would ask that the viewing public, particularly those in Lakeview, make comment via the commission's website about the actions that just happened, and constructively so with regard to the naming and potential names for those streets, so that we can have a robust discussion about that and subsequent meetings. The only other piece to the initial report that I wanted to ask you guys about today was we did not assign any names or prefaces or recommendations rather to Washington Artillery Park or Washington Park, because at the time we were not sure about who owned these, or who owned Washington Artillery Park at least. We now know that the city does own Washington Artillery Park. And we already knew that they own Washington Park, which from the public, someone had suggested be renamed Ellis Marcellus Park. Thomas and Sue helped me here, but not 100% clear that these 2 facilities would fit under the ordinance directly. So that, if I'm right about that, please let me know that.
Sue, I'm going to defer the first part of that to you.
There is an argument to be made that Washington Artillery Park does fall under the terms of the ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
The argument for Washington Park is less strong. And frankly, given both of those sites, given the prominence of them, given the opportunity to do a process that is targeting those locations and the users of those locations in a thoughtful process, I would say that they should not come within the bounds of this commission.
Okay, thank you. And not necessarily today, but in subsequent meetings, though, I would like the commission to contemplate, as we do our final report, we may mention that there may be some streets, places, or parks that we would mention or suggest rather to the council that they look at in a further process because it's beyond our realm. And I would include both those in that list, along with, as we stated once before, Milne Playground, Poydras Street, and Jackson Square. And we can have, we can have conversation about that now if you'd like, or we can wait until we get closer to adopting the actual final report. So hearing no response, I'll assume that we will wait on that. Is there any public comment on this agenda item, Andrew?
There is, but I think that it looks like it might be conflated with just the public hearing
comments.
section of this.
Yes.
So I think it's appropriate to reserve it to the end of the meeting when we go through all of that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item 6, which is stakeholder engagement. We have continued our outreach. The Spears Group has publicized our meetings via social media and arranged appearances for us to get the word out so that we can get more public comment on this process. I personally have been a guest on WWL's Tommy Tucker program on December 11th, and I'm scheduled for Oliver Thomas's show on WBOK tomorrow morning at 7:15. I would ask Commissioner Hill if she has anything more to add to this report, as she has been coordinating some of the meetings with us, for us rather.
As we noted in the report, I believe there are 9 different meetings that we have documented that have either been by invitation from the commission with a Zoom call set up, or by invitation by a particular neighborhood association where we were invited to attend their meeting. We do have another meeting, I believe, tomorrow with the Lakeview. Lake Vista, I'm sorry, Neighborhood Association, which we are looking forward to. And in the past couple of weeks since our last meeting, there has been a lot of robust activity on the website, and the commission is certainly, we are all reading that information and responding where appropriate. And we really thank everybody for their ongoing input on that. And we will, of course, continue to have meetings up until the point where we have to draft the final report. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
I just wanted to ask too, if Commissioner Sturmkow, you are the representative in probably the most active district with the most streets with the most impact. Is there anything else you want to add to that, Paul?
No, I don't think so. We're still reaching out to the 2 separate Holly Grove neighborhood associations, and for a myriad of reasons, we've been unable to connect and pick dates. But we're still trying. I'm still trying. So, I think we've touched everybody else in District A, or most everybody else, at least that I'm aware of.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much. And I also want to again express gratitude to the members of District A, in particular those in Lakeview, who have been extremely active in commenting in this process and including us in their association meetings. It has been very collegial and very good to get these opinions and obviously, as we stated before, some actual information that has led to deeper dives that brought us to conclude that some streets needed to be treated differently. So, I greatly appreciate that. And that has been a direct result of Commissioner Sturmkow's, energy that he has put into representing District A. So I really appreciate that. I know that Commissioner Raymond, you had been trying to get a meeting scheduled in District D. Have you have any updates on that?
So we got the first one scheduled with the Lake Vista community. We're trying to get Lake Terrace now and my neighborhood association, Lake Oaks, scheduled. I've also been in conversation with Representative Matt Willard, who's helping organize meetings with his neighborhood association and the Seabrook Neighborhood Association. So hopefully more information about that to come.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Commissioners, does anyone have any comments or other questions or updates on stakeholder engagement since our last meeting? Hearing none. Andrew, is there any public comment on this section?
Yeah, there is. First comment is from Nona R. Martin. If consideration is given to renaming General Early Drive to Dent Drive, I suggest that the street name include the full name of the person who tribute is given, Albert W. Dent. Otherwise, the renaming to Dent Drive will have no historical significance, and many will not know or be encouraged to know who Dr. Dent was and his many contributions to the city of New Orleans. Next, Adrian Meister. Many of the people on Calhoun Street feel they have no voice in the street naming process. We were never notified or consulted. You made the decision with no input from the Calhoun Street people. We should have been allowed to suggest names. We should have been allowed to participate in the process. We understand why the street names are being changed, but we should have been given a chance to join in the discussion. All of a sudden, we are told the new name for Calhoun Street. Boom, no input, no discussion, it's final. Outrageous. This is the USA, not Russia. Next comment is from Allison Hotard. I'm excited about the potential for change in our city and ushering in a new era. Renaming the city streets represents who we really are, a city of diversity, and exemplifies what the future should look like. Next comment is from Bruce Hofer. Here are some thoughts from folks who are regular citizens who will bear the brunt and impact of the commission's work here. Many people are not happy. You may laugh and scoff at them, but remember, your street is not having its name changed. The world is round, commissioners, the world is round. The commission and its creators have ignored the accident that facing our history and learning from bad history helps us not to repeat that bad history. Why don't we be smart about this and try and unite all of us and spend money and effort on our current needs and trying to fix our current community and who we are now today, not on pretending bad things really didn't happen in the past. So some folks have written about your process. Folks, there is absolutely no stopping this movement, this woke juggernaut of renaming all racist street names to right all wrongs. It is a complete exercise in, I want to change these street names, I feel good about doing this, and I have power to do this. And you don't, and you cannot stop us from doing this. That is what is happening here. It's power and control, and it sounds like retribution. I got the feeling that any suggestion Palmer Avenue residents came up with would have been struck down. Why? Retribution, power. Look, we all know what's going to happen here. Personally, the scope and breadth of what this commission is doing is very disturbing and overreaching. We're talking about changing street names to empower people today to feel good about the perception of fixing what happened to the disenfranchised and oppressed many decades ago. Next comment is from Professor Dr. Baz Lecoq. Apologies for the pronunciation. I applaud the way in which the city of New Orleans can dignify historic change by re-examining the way it writes its history on and in its streets. This is an important step in acknowledging that history changes, societies change. In the city of Berlin, similar procedures are running to better allow reflection on both Germany's colonial past and the slavery past of the US. In my neighborhood, for example, a street named Uncle Tom's Cabin is in the process of being renamed. I'm sure the reference to the outcomes of the process of reflection taking place in your city will positively attribute to those going on here. Baz Lecoq, Chair, African History, Humboldt University of Berlin. Next comment is David Bowling. I have lived on Palmer since 1991 and never knew who the street was named for until the issues of renaming the street were raised in connection with the recent renaming drive. Now that I know about Reverend Palmer's beliefs and actions, I agree with the rededication of the street to one of the many deserving Palmers, including Earl. Perfect solution. Unless redressing past wrongs is really an excuse for punitive action against us simply because of who we are and where we live. Count me as opposed to renaming of Palmer. Next comment is from Grace Hoffer. I request Palmer Avenue be renamed Harold Palmer Avenue. Next comment is from Jean Bowling. Please do not change the name of Palmer Avenue. Please focus your efforts on something more meaningful. There's no accomplishment in changing the name of Palmer Avenue. I've lived on Palmer Avenue since 1991, and not one of my neighbors have ever mentioned Benjamin Palmer. Few, if any, have known who Benjamin Palmer was until just very recently. I'm sure that just until a couple months ago, any member of the street naming commission would flunk a Benjamin Palmer biography test. It would have been very difficult to find someone then or now offended by this word Palmer. Palmer is a somewhat common name and evokes no emotions, raises no eyebrows, and makes anyone feel uneasy to say they live or work on Palmer Avenue. People I know whose first or last name is Palmer are not ashamed or embarrassed with their name. The name Palmer does not carry the weight of other historical villains, i.e. Hitler, Bundy, Idi Amin, Bin Laden. One had to truly seek to be offended by this particular street name. What a nonsensical endeavor to work to find what may be offensive or hurtful, real or imagined. Measures such as street naming are, in a word, silly and erode the integrity of the true purpose of government. Offending good citizens just for the exercise is below the purpose of any public commission and quite simply embarrassing. Please put your efforts to truly accomplishing something. Make a difference, repair this street, improve the drainage. All citizens benefit and find agreement there. Perhaps if the commission experiences street flooding, car damaging potholes, mosquito-infested gutters, not to mention the crime found on the street, they would not be in favor of honoring someone else by renaming this avenue after them. Next comment is Parker LaCordney. My wife Julie and I have lived at our home on Palmer Avenue for nearly 26 years. For the many reasons previously articulated by so many of our neighbors and friends, we vehemently oppose the proposal to rename our street. Next comment is James Pellerin. Dear commissioners, I read the comments of my friend and neighbor Ned Benjamin regarding the proposed name change to Palmer Avenue. My thinking matches Mr. Benjamin's on this topic. I ask you to give appropriate consideration to a submission. Sincerely, James Pellerin. Next comment is C. Morgan Baps. Monuments, like commemorative names, plaques, and holidays, are about the creation and maintenance of our communal identities. Through them, we preserve the past so that future generations will be able to maintain a continuous understanding of who they are and who they have to be. Until now, monuments in the city of New Orleans have represented our complex, multicultural, multiracial, sometimes fraught, sometimes celebratory community through a limited and oppressive symbolism of whiteness, violence, and war. Robert E. Lee, who never set foot here, oversaw us from his pillar, like this glorious free city were some kind of plantation or enemy force. And I'm grateful we've had the wisdom to say enough with that. We are more than that. We nurture like Leah Chase. We survive like Jasper, Georges, and Celestine. We fight for each other like Francis Joseph Godet, Herman Nidlow, Father Tuomi, and Edith Stern. We care for each other like Dr. Mayo and Eleanor Peake. We make beautiful music like Buddy Bolton, Alan Toussaint, Professor Longhair, and Mahalia Jackson. We make beauty like Chief Montana. I am thrilled that we will soon have a landscape that reflects who we are now, who we have always been. Next comment is by Dr. Brian Mitchell. I am shocked and dismayed that Oscar James Dunn was denied the honor of having a street named for him. Dunn is regarded as one of Louisiana's most respected, honest, and admired political leaders. His record is without blemish, and his contributions to the city of New Orleans were numerous. Dunn integrated public schools, served not only as the nation's first lieutenant governor, but also served as acting governor of the state prior to P.B.S. Pinchback. Serving as assistant recorder, Dunn was also the first Black man to preside over a legal proceeding in Louisiana. Shortly after his death, the legislature voted in favor of erecting a monument in his honor. However, the monument was never erected. The city has the opportunity of correcting this injustice, but instead has decided against rob him of the recognition he deserves. What is most disappointing is that the commission circumvented its own democratic process, striking Dunn's name from consideration after he won the vote using the commission's own nominating process. The Dunn family asked the commission to honor their vote and their agreed upon nomination process and rename the street in honor of Oscar James Dunn. Respectfully, Dr. Brian K. Mitchell. Next comment is from F. Keller Reese. As residents of Palmer Avenue, my family and I strongly suggest rededication of Palmer Avenue, honoring New Orleans' own rock and roll Hall of Fame drummer Earl Palmer. Earl Palmer was born, raised, and worked in New Orleans his entire life. This is an appropriate and simple, I believe that's supposed to be solution to an uncomplicated problem. Next comment is from Donna K. Berger. I'm near 50 years residing on Palmer Avenue and currently owning 2 properties on the 15-block-long one-way street, mapped as one of the integral border streets of Tulane and Loyola Universities, only named church and Sinai Synagogue edifices, intersected only by 4 through streets. All other streets intersecting Palmer are dead ends as the next blocks, right and left, including dead-ended into Tulane Nolman Stadium. And residents of a street that has a common name universally used currently by near hundreds of same name USA streets and 2, wherein Inola Palmer Avenue is recognized uniquely in the book New Orleans Architecture, the University section, detailing historic architecture in a historic district. I am also a civic-minded resident of Palmer Avenue with progressive perspectives. Aforementioned said, I am not in favor of changing the name of Palmer Avenue. I ask for your consideration to rededicating the name of Palmer Avenue from having been named for the Reverend of centuries ago to being named for the musician of more current century. Rededication to Earl Palmer, pioneer and progressive musicians, will honor the name of Earl Palmer as Palmer Avenue. It would be suitable by non-aspersion of the surname Palmer, which is widely a surname of many NOLA and USA citizens. It would shed light on the past Reverend reference use of the name and declare that use as former and behind us to all citizens, and brighten the future use of the name Palmer to all citizens, as well as shine honor on the most deserving Earl Palmer, highlighting all the NOLA culture he represents. As we dedicated, Palmer Avenue would retain the single name cadence character, and almost all the surrounding streets have: Nashville, State, Octavia, Joseph, Arabella, Jefferson, Webster, Ferret, Willow, Loyola, Marquette, Cromwell, LaSalle, Barrett, Delord, Story, etc. Rededication would be a purpose-driven historic endeavor, and imbalance would not proliferate a most arduous, half-built, underestimated undertaking of address, altering bearing upon not only the residents of Palmer Avenue, but the university, and that is 2 minutes. Next comment is by David Rubenstein. The circle on St. Charles Avenue should not have a person's name. It will only stir up unnecessary controversy for the future. The next comment is by Mary Mycian Gubala. I would like to know if any effort will be made to survey the renters and homeowners on the streets that have been proposed to be renamed. Will they be informed before making the decision of the time, energy, and money that it will cost to change their address for the driver's license, car, home, and flood insurance, social security, credit cards, credit union, IRA, 401k, IRS, phone, internet, cable companies, etc. For businesses, this will include business cards, websites, advertising stationery, etc. And that is all the comments.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Well, I'd like to say one thing about the thread of the comments. To some who made reference to not being included or asked about the process, this has been a highly publicized process since the ordinance was passed in June, and certainly has been promoted heavily, particularly asking for public input, including creating a website specifically to facilitate that since August. So I push back on any comment that you had no opportunity to speak on this before anything was quote unquote decided, which, as we continue to repeat every week, these are initial recommendations right now that can or may not be adopted by the city council for actual changes. So it is not too late for your opinion to be given or heard, but I am going to ask that the public stop mischaracterizing their ability to, respond to this process. That's what these meetings are for. That's what we're trying to do and have been trying to do since we started convening in August. That being said, please provide as much comment as you'd like. We would like to hear it. We will consider it. It will be weighed before we do our final report. And then that final report may or may not be adopted by the council persons, or may be adopted in part and not and only in part rather. So you have time. It is time for you to have meaningful input. Commissioners, do any of you have any comments on this portion before we move to the next agenda item?
Carl, if you don't mind, I'd like to specifically comment on Calhoun Street, the comment that the Calhoun Street residents weren't given the opportunity. That the major part of Calhoun is in my district, and we specifically had meetings with, I think it was Audubon Area Zoning Association, and I'm not sure the name of the other neighborhood association, but I made sure that those who live on Calhoun Street, those neighborhood associations were specifically met with, and we did that. So I want the record to be clear about that.
Yes, thank you very much, Commissioner Sturpko. I appreciate you clarifying that. Any other commissioner have a comment or a statement before we move on? Hearing none, we'll move to agenda item 7. Are there other matters the commissioners would like to discuss before we move to the public comment section of the agenda? Hearing none, and Andrew, are there comments on the other matters?
Yeah, but I think that they Same thing as what
Jermaine?
happened before. I think these are all going to be read sort of in
Yes.
full.
Okay.
And for commissioners' information, we have about 120 comments to go through right now, 120, 130.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. And each one is going to be subject to the 2 minutes.
Yes.
But we will, but just for the public's knowledge, it will be part of our record. We will read them. We've been reading them consistently for months. So we will definitely read what you've submitted, even if the time limit doesn't allow it all to be aired today. And so with that, we'll move on to item 8, public comment on the initial report. Andrew, I think the way we will handle this is you will read those comments into the record. Commissioners, please feel free to ask for discussion on any comment that you'd like as we move forward, as you deem appropriate. Andrew?
Okay. First comment is from Nick Weldon. I would urge the commissioners to rename Oscar Dunn's, to reconsider Oscar Dunn's name. He initially received the most votes for Berman Highway, but on a motion by Commissioner Hill seeking fairly to create space for more names of women, Dunn was overridden for Eleanor Peake. Dunn was not only America's first Black lieutenant governor, but also the first Black public official to visit a sitting president in the White House grant, and was the first Black governor. I have co-authored a book with the descendant of Dunn's that proves with primary sources that the common perception that P.E.S. Pinchback was the first is incorrect. Dunn preceded him as an acting governor, same title as Pinchback, by more than a year. Dunn was on the leading edge of the suffrage fight during the Civil War. On the city council, proposed a school integration bill that was later adopted by the 1868 Constitutional Convention, and was an uncompromising proponent of civil rights law. His children were in the first class of Black children admitted to the integrated schools in 1871. He was also the highest ranking Prince Hall Freemason in the state, working tirelessly for freedmen, orphans, and other benevolent causes. He died suddenly in office and inspired 20,000 New Orleanians to come out to his Canal Street funeral. In 1863, Governor Kellogg signed a bill to create a monument in Dunn's memory, but as redeemers reclaimed political power, his plans were scuttled. This is a rare opportunity to make right on that injustice and properly honor Dunn. If not Berman Highway, perhaps Berman Place, currently slated for BBS Pinchback, a far more complicated figure who is credibly accused of playing a role in Dunn's death. Other option would be Governor Nichols, a redeemer governor who helped dismantle the achievements of Dunn and others, and who runs through 2 neighborhoods in which Dunn resided, Tremay and the French Quarter. Dunn's record stands up to any other man proposed, and it would be a tragic mistake to exclude him from the 37 names recommended by the commission. Next comment is by Donna Fitch. Robert E. Lee to Allen Toussaint Boulevard, tremendous as long as his family agrees. Tulane Avenue to Henry Roseland Bird, use his proper name to truly recognize him. More famous and bigger city impact than Toonie Montana. General Taylor, Ellis Marcellus Street, Lee Circle, Music Circle with plaques to some of our world-renowned musicians. The next comment is by Marjorie R. Eston. I fully support the commission and its recommendations with the exception of renaming of the circle. I begin by supporting any honor that the city of New Orleans may choose to bestow upon the late Leah Chase and her late husband Dookie, who merits more credit than he is often given. My concern should in no way be seen to discredit Leah Dookie or any member of their family who have earned their places as New Orleans luminaries. My reservations about naming the circle Leah Chase Circle is simply that it will be too easy for the detractors to continue calling it Lee Circle, emphasizing the first syllable and minimizing the second. It's too close. Despite the enormous differences between General Lee and Miss Chase, the name itself is not sufficiently disruptive. It invites willful ignorance. We can name another prominent place for Miss Chase and choose a name for the circle that will force recognition and acknowledgement of the change that has long passed due. No one should be given an excuse to disregard this essential transformation of our city. With that one concern, I offer congratulations to the commission for your hard job well done. Next comment is by Kelly Wolf. This year has been a difficult one for all of us. New Orleanians have, for the most part, pulled together to protect each other through the health crisis. The timing of renaming so many streets in the city could not come at a worse time. This is one of the more painful upheaval in our world. I recognize that there will never be a convenient time to ask homeowners, residents, and businesses to willingly accept the expense, aggravation, inconvenience, and angst to change their addresses. With that being said, I would like to propose instead of the suggested name of Edith Stern Avenue to have a rededication of Palmer Avenue to honor Mr. Earl Palmer, the famed New Orleans drummer. Isn't the goal of renaming the streets to remove the honor from the original Mr. Palmer? This resolution would allow us to honor Earl Palmer and his family, but avoid much chaos and expense while retaining the personal connection to our home address. I expect that the committee has already predetermined their objections to retain Palmer as a street name, even if it is after a worthy musician named Palmer. Is it that the name must be stripped regardless of a logical rededication? If the Palmer name has to be stripped, then it is logical to return it back to Henry Clay Avenue, which retains the historical elements of the community. In reviewing the many renaming suggestions by the committee, I personally believe that the many double names on street signs will create great difficulty navigating the city. Aside from our residents, imagine the visitors trying to navigate the street names with so many full names. If the committee recognizes this impracticality, perhaps a better solution would be to simply select impersonal words and forego choosing people to honor, especially since honoring a person can later be deemed unfit. With that rationale, I would propose that Palmer Avenue be renamed University Avenue because of its proximity to both Loyola and Tulane universities and blending with these communities. I respectfully request that you hear our voices as residents of Palmer Avenue and give our suggestions heavy weight in the decision. I propose 3 options above, all of which are better than Edith Sturt Avenue. A woman who made a contribution but has absolutely no connection to, and that is 2 minutes. The next comment is from Catherine Fabreau. The law-abiding tax-paying residents of Palmer Avenue, some of whom have lived on Palmer for decades, other families on this street have been here for generations, respectfully request that our street remains Palmer. None of us knew the origins of the name Palmer or cared until a commission was formed to research the name and inform us that it was offensive. 1, it is imperative that Palmer remain a one-word street. We do not want to have wasteful time spelling out a lengthy street name anytime we order a pizza or give directions to our homes. We do not want to live Edith Stern or any other names with 2 or more words. We would like that one word to be Palmer in honor of Earl Palmer, a worthy and under-recognized New Orleanian who checks every box for what the Commission Council says they are trying to accomplish. We will even chip in to buy a plaque and have a party to make a fuss over the rededication. You would get good press from this positive and unifying decision. We request to rededicate in the first round, and the commission denied our very reasonable request. We ask you to reconsider. If you deny our request, we ask that the residents of Palmer be able to vote to select a new one-word name that is agreeable to all of us. We are the ones who will bear the brunt of your decision. If you dictate that, we must change the name of our street. Next comment is from Chris Belser. Leonidas Street was not named after Leonidas K. Polk. Numerous people have indicated and provided info about this, including the fact that the street name shows up on city maps before L.K. Polk gained his position in Louisiana. If the commission wants to rename the street to honor Haley Jackson, that's great, but let's not do it based on a false narrative of history. The next comment is from Courtney Kearney. A huge thank you to all the historians, archivists, community members, and students who put this incredible report together. This report not only provides the much needed context for this project, but it is an invaluable educational tool for all of us. I learned so much regarding the history of current names, and most importantly, the history and stories of many individuals lost to me until now. I am proud this city is finally taking the time to rename these streets and places and recommending individuals that, quote, actively honored heroism in the face of danger, the dogged pursuit of justice, courage against long odds, and genius and artistic creativity. I hope the council approves this report and moves forward with this project. I can't wait to walk, bike, drive down, possibly Sister Gertrude Morgan Street. Next comment is from Carol Kaplan. As you see from above, I live on Calhoun Street between Willow and Ferrer. I bought my home in 1981. I did not buy it to honor an individual named Calhoun. I am sure this is true of people who bought on Palmer or Walker or most of the other streets in consideration of a very expensive disruptive name change. I agree with Jeff Davis and feel the renaming of Norman Francis is honorable, same with Robert E. Lee. But all these other streets, including Calhoun, it has gone too far, only bringing attention to streets, not people. Where does it stop? Tulane? What about Claiborne? The Claiborne certainly were plantation owners. Do you criticize Wendy Boggs, one of the most ecumenical citizens of New Orleans, because she was a Claiborne? It is time to stop. New Orleans has far greater problems than street names that the overwhelming majority of citizens have no idea what they represent. Our city council has great representatives as well as stellar members of the renaming committee. Let us focus on unity and division and, focus on unity and not division and derision. This uprooting of street names will be tremendously expensive for the city and citizens. Let's focus on police and fire and the amenities our city so desperately needs. Thank you for your consideration. The next comment is from Hannah Krieger Benson. I am thrilled by the results of the street renaming study and want to urge the city to adopt all the recommendations. The deep scholarship and complex work have produced new potential street names that make our city landscape so much better by honoring people previously ignored by history, and by removing the monuments to white supremacy and Confederacy from our built environment. In Mid-City, I'm especially excited to drive, shop, and eat on 2 Montana Avenue. And as of August, to say I live near Norman C. Francis. Thank you to the council for that renaming. Continue the process of updating our landscape to reflect those we should honor, uplift, amplify, and remember. The next comment is from Joseph Malone. I support the 37 names that have been proposed. Many of the names are for people who attempted to emancipate themselves from slavery, union leaders, and so many New Orleans labor, racial justice, and progressive policy history makers. These are often told histories that we should learn more about. So be brave, do the right thing, and move forward with the street renaming for justice and equity for all. The next comment is by David Kunian. It is extremely important to show the people of New Orleans, the next generation, and the people who visit the rich and unexpurgated history of the Crescent City. It is also important to show what and who we value. Renaming streets and circles after such important, upstanding, and creative individuals indicate who we are and what we stand for. Renaming Lee Circle for Leah Chase, who was an outstanding figure and chef, and Robert E. Lee for Alan Toussaint, who wrote and produced so many songs for which the city is known, shows that we value art and creativity and the people who make it. The efforts of those two and the others for whom the streets will be renamed are evidence of our greatness. It is time to honor those people and not those people who have tried to separate and divide us. I hope in the next set of recommendations, we honor those who fought just as hard and created just as much, but are not as well known. They are as deserving too. Joyce Bracey. I am excited about the proposed street name changes. It is time for New Orleanians to learn and honor the true history of our city, the complete story, not just the story of oppressors, but of the real revolutionaries who made change possible, one heroic act at a time. Thank you for your work on this. The next comment is from Bob Morrell. I'm grateful for the emphasis on restorative justice and suggesting people that self-emancipated or died trying. While attending the LCIA meeting with this community, there were some bigoted comments diminishing the value of their names, which only further whitewashes the issue you were brought together to resolve. Lakeview was a swamp until the 1900s. You will hear people arguing that the current names somehow hold value to my neighborhood. Their value lies in dog whistles to the racists that never left the city. These recommendations are wonderful, and thanks to the research team. The next comment is by Nadia Skittleson. Hi, I am fully supportive and excited for the push to rename these streets and honoring people who fought to liberate themselves from enslavement and create a better world for generations of Black people to come. The flash in the pan lost cause of the Confederacy should have no place of honor in our city and should be relegated to the history books and dustbins of time. Next comment is by Ryan Williams. The names delivered to the council for the review represent the best of what the city has to offer, and their legacy and memory should be duly honored. This move does nothing to erase history. Rather, it honors what makes us vibrant and human and puts the emphasis on the best part of our souls, the creation of and resilience inherent in our culture. I thank everyone who put the work to develop this list and look forward to the day we will give our street names and ourselves the respect they deserve. The next comment is by Patrick Armstrong. It is past time for New Orleans to elevate the names of people who more fully embody the diverse spirit and story of the city to a celebrated place in the public sphere and reassign figures famous for their contributions to the Confederacy and white supremacy to the footnotes and citations of historical research where they are more appropriately investigated in context. I say this as a collared shirt and UGA cap wearing white boy from the South, born in Alabama, raised in Georgia, now a resident of New Orleans going on 14 years. So much of my formal education and informal culture were steeped in historical vestiges of the lost cause in the so-called Confederacy. I feel culturally and intellectually poor for missing what was admitted. This learned memory of mine was built on the expense of humans whose history and experience told the story of the places I have lived in far greater depth, richness, and poignancy. As I read through the Street Renaming Commission's report, I think of how much I do not know about the essential New Orleans and American stories associated with these names and how we would likely never encounter them otherwise. This is especially true when it comes to the names of enslaved humans who risked life and limb to escape their captors and find freedom. The names Jasper, Mary, Elizabeth, Georges, and Celestine resonate as strongly as a thunderbolt through the centuries as figures of an indomitable spirit, losing even their full names in the historical record due to the unforgivable injustices of their time. How could they be denied an honor of public place in our city now that we have learned what scant details we know about their lives, while we celebrate the very men who took their lives to perpetuate the injustices done to them? I grew up on St. Simon's Island, coastal Georgia, a place that sold its own history to tourists in a similar way New Orleans does. And in a similar way, the stories of non-whites were de-emphasized to a point that vanished from local memory outside of deep cuts of research or folklore. The path to correcting that is a long one, but it begins with writing the names in public so that residents with curiosity might want it, and that is 2 minutes. The next comment is by Jane McBride. Speaking as a New Orleans resident of 25 years and the great-great-granddaughter of the Confederate captain, I sincerely hope to see the city of New Orleans cease to honor slave holders and those who fought to preserve slavery and white supremacy. The monuments, buildings, and street names honoring these individuals do not preserve history. Instead, they preserve the great lie that seeks to erase history. By our past, can we move forward? I, along with many others, have not heard the history of the massacre of the White League of members of the Louisiana Reconstruction government until Take 'em Down NOLA targeted the Battle of Liberty Place monument for removal. The monument taught us nothing, its removal did. Now is the time to start to dismantle the mythology and learn our real history by honoring those who valiantly struggled against slavery, genocide, and segregation. This is the history that has been erased in America. Let's start doing better in New Orleans. Next comment is by Roberto Gimont. Apologies for pronunciation. Wow, how exciting it is to be able to go to New Orleans and take a picture on Jelly Roll Morton Street. I can see that being a tourism draw for jazz and Latin music aficionados, of which there are thankfully many millions more than obscure Confederate functionaries aficionados worldwide. Good work, New Orleans. Can't wait to visit. The next comment is by David Shaver. I suggest 2 names for the renaming of Palmer Avenue. 1, Henry Clay Avenue. 2, Earl Palmer Avenue. The next comment is by Robert Vance. The week after, excuse me. Excuse me. Next comment is by Robert Vance. The week after this commission had already voted to change recommendations, some of the commissioners finally attended a virtual meeting with the residents of Lakeview neighborhood for the very first time. In an effort to assist the commission and ensure the accuracy of its conclusions' historical record, Lakeview residents provided the commission with a report containing comprehensive sourced historical research which shed light on the overarching theme of all the streets throughout the entire Lakeview neighborhood. This stood in stark contrast to the research contained in the commission's report, which only looked at a few hand-picked non-consecutive streets in Lakeview. Rather than taking a holistic approach to determine the overarching theme and history behind all of the neighborhood street names, the commission's research simply tried to determine if anyone with the last names like Lane or Walker had an affiliation with the Confederacy. This backwards approach created a blind spot that prevented the commission from realizing the streets were named after generals and heroes from the Mexican-American War. While a couple of these men went on to later fight for the Confederacy, many more either died in the Mexican-American War or fought for the Union and were staunchly anti-slavery. The commission's failure to recognize this fact is excusable given that many Americans know nothing about the Mexican-American War, and no one on the commission's panel of experts has any expertise or teaching experience in that era of American history. What is not excusable is the commission's failure to consider or even respond to the detailed research that was presented to it by a dedicated group of this city's residents. Instead, the commission forged ahead and issued a report on December 2nd that failed to even acknowledge, much less refute, the possibility that there could be other namesakes for these streets. While I remain hopeful that the commission will respond, I will not hold my breath. It appears that despite the commission's lip service, this train has already left the station and no questions or facts will be permitted to stand in its way.
Andrew, I'm going to stop you right there just to say that that was a highly not factual comment. We had many conversations with Lakeview prior to that initial report going out. And as you can see by the results of today, you know, that it was a meaningful conversation that was well spent. So, you know, I just have to take issue with that particular comment.
Commissioner Connor, may I also just add that the report that we
produced in relationship to that comment. It should be, I hope it is readily available for all to read.
Thank you. Yes, we will make it readily available. Yes. Thank you, Andrew.
Next comment is by Amy Brown. New Orleans, including those related to racial tension. Sorry, I think I got that wrong. I apologize. Let me start that again. I have lived on Calhoun Street since 1999 and against the renaming of Palmer and Calhoun. I do not believe renaming either of these relatively minor streets will serve to improve any of the current problems that have long plagued New Orleans, including those related to racial tension. How many residents, black or white, know much of John Calhoun or his racist views? We did not buy our homes on Calhoun because of the street's name. I didn't know who the street was named after or anything about John Calhoun, including his racism. Moreover, what real benefit will be gained by the renaming? It seems like time, energy, and effort and money being put into this issue could be redirected to many other issues that would improve the lives of our citizens, black and white, like increased police protection, better police training, police body cameras, better crime cameras, street repairs, sewage and water board repairs. The list of the city's needs is seemingly endless. While I'm firmly opposed to idolizing racists, there are other ways to address these offending street names besides renaming them. As many have suggested, the streets could be rededicated to a different Palmer and different Calhoun without burdening the residents with the difficulties that will come with the renaming. Several Palmers have been proposed. Keith Calhoun is a local prominent photographer whose work directly addresses racism, making him a worthy cause. However, I would caution that you're embarking down a slippery slope. What is the commission 50 or 100 years from now going to learn about Father Twomey or whatever other person that they find offensive in their future views on political correctness? The next comment is by Joy Willig. What a rich and thoughtful report on all the possibilities of recognizing the real history and culture of this great diverse city. We should no longer immortalize those who sought to erase the existence and memories of truly courageous New Orleanians who have, as per the meticulously documented biographies, enriched our city and gone unrecognized. While I have no specific recommendations among the choices offered, I trust that the commission will thoughtfully choose from among them. Next comment is by Mike Sammartino. Good afternoon, New Orleans City Council. The monuments, street names, school names, and parks dedicated to oppressors of our past impede on our progress in the future. These names do not represent who we are as a people and as a city. We need to take them all down and rename them to people who will inspire the greatness we want to see in the future. Why would we want to look to exploiters and oppressors for inspiration? Immediately, I can see the direct inspiration from those oppressors at work. The people facing charges for allegedly taking down the McDonough statue need to have every charge dropped, or you as a city council are providing living proof that you are more willing to follow the oppressor's example than a just example. We need to fund the people. I am of the people, and I will want my money to go to proactive measures than reactive points. The people are the voice, not top-down corporations or naming committees. Give the people what they need and not the corporation, what the corporations lazily expect. We need to give the residents of Gordon Plaza a fully funded relocation yesterday. Thank you. Next comment is from Brittany Enos. Council members, the time for debate and discussion is over. You must take action now and finish the job of removing the remaining statues of exploitation and oppression. All monuments, street names, school names, and monikers of parks and public spaces need to be returned to the people. It's long past due. Additionally, you need to drop all the charges against those accused of allegedly removing the John McDonough bus. This is work the city should have done long ago, so the city bringing trumped up charges for a piece of garbage that you plan to remove anyway. You're basically wasting money on something that someone did for you for free. Ridiculous. That is not all. Stop criminalizing our people. The investment into children, families, and job development is already negligible, a mere combined 4% compared to the 63% given to police, jails, and surveillance. Flip the budget. Now more than ever, you need to commit to investing in our communities. Uplift the working people of this city and promote living wages. We don't need more funding for the police when the police continue to terrorize us. They must be held accountable for their actions. Develop a civilian review board with subpoena powers, investigative powers, and the power to bring charges against them. There's not enough oversight, even with the consent decree, and law enforcement should not be above the law. Speaking of those who think they are above the law, what's with all the tax exemptions for the rich and large corporations? Hello, Folgers. The city is flushing millions of dollars down the toilet, claiming broke, and cutting essential services, furloughing the fire department workers. Really? You keep squeezing poor working class people, in some instances, right out of their homes when you have the power to stop evictions. And then you cry poor, still siphoning millions of public dollars away from the people. The mayor even going so far as to try and gouge the public library to fund private interests. Much like that $200 million that is still going to the Superdome renovation that we don't need. We're in a state of emergency, and that's how you're going to spend the people's money, our money? Again, ridiculous. Above all, there is more than enough money in the city's coffers to support a fully funded relocation for the residents of, that's 2 minutes. The next comment is from Patricia Clay. I come to you as a law-abiding, tax-paying resident of Palmer Avenue. Additionally, I feel I represent my ancestors who resided on Palmer Avenue since the 1800s, and we're also long-time law-abiding, tax-paying residents here. We were never aware of the origins of the name Palmer. I always associated the Palmer Avenue and the surrounding area, and the city is my home with all its faults. Despite the history surrounding the street's original namesake, there were many historical moments, important ones in residents' lives that are also important. Many of the homes along Palmer Avenue are designated historical landmarks, and upon such designations, the city was happy to have them take a place in significance and rightly preserved as a part of holding on to the rich history of New Orleans. This is something that many find unique to our beautiful city. Palmer Avenue is more than a name and more than its namesake. Despite the terrible history attached to its namesake, to my cousins who grew up here on Palmer Avenue, left this place they called home to fight during World War II. The letters they mailed home while at war, many of which I still have, were addressed to their family here on Palmer Avenue. And miraculously, when the war was over, they came home to Palmer Avenue. Many of my relatives lived and died here on Palmer Avenue and the surrounding areas. So to hear the streets will be renamed is very upsetting to me. The city has the right to rename streets when it's in the interest of public safety and well-being. However, at this particular time during a pandemic, the very real additional stress and burden is placing on its residents having to change the street name to a whole new name on all documents, etc. Seems to me an undue burden. Also, changing the street name would mean costly city expenses of changing out signage at every intersection. Perhaps a win-win solution to wiping out the city's original mistake in honoring the Confederacy, yet not placing undue burden, stress, and hardship on homeowners is to rename it Palmer Avenue, but this time the city can name it in honor of someone worthy. I hereby support renaming and rededicating the streets Earl Palmer and calling it Palmer Avenue. The rededication could also provide free education of the legitimate wrongful attachment to the Confederacy and how we should never go back, but should always remember. And that is 2 minutes. Okay. The next comment is by Peter Cole. My name is Dr. Peter Cole, history professor at Western Illinois University and founder of the Chicago Race Riot of 1919 Commemoration Project. My teaching and research focus on African American and public history. I live in Macomb, Illinois. I strongly support the work that the New Orleans City Council Street Renaming Commission is doing to eliminate the racist, anti-democratic, violent ideology that defined and still defines white supremacy and the Confederate lost cause ideology that has dominated the post-bellum narrative over slavery, white supremacy, and the Civil War. In 2020, it is 155 years too late to celebrate white supremacists and enslavers. I commend the city of New Orleans for removing Robert E. Lee's statue and other monuments that honor people who should truly be condemned. The Confederacy was formed by rich white men who wanted to continue to enslave Black people and feared that changes were coming. They were not heroes, they were racist traitors. Similarly, I commend this commission for continuing this important work by renewing the names of people who don't deserve the honor of a place name. Thank you for examining which streets deserve renaming and moving forward, whose names deserve remembering. Next comment is by Dr. Whitney Stewart. As a historian and native Southerner, I adamantly support the work of the CCSRC. Their research has produced a clear report on the extensive use of Confederate names throughout New Orleans and made a strong argument for the renaming of these streets. We do not need to celebrate individuals who fought against equality and justice for all. We should be lifting up the names of those who fought long and hard to recognize these American ideals. The CCSRC report demonstrates that the street renaming will do just that, commemorating Americans who deserve the kind of recognition that a street name confers. The next comment is by Professor Matt Sakakini. I am grateful to the City Council and the volunteers on the Street Renaming Commission for addressing this problem head on. There is no reasoned argument for honoring Confederates, slave owners, and other avowed racists with official street names. We should not be teaching our children that we disavow racism except for this or that significant historical figure whose racism can be overlooked. Under no circumstances is it acceptable that the men who upheld Jim Crow law and maintained racial inequality in this city should be sanctioned by its government. Those who accuse you of erasing history take their own racial biases to be an objective record of history. Debates over history should focus on our children's textbooks, not street names. For who can explain to a Black child with a straight face and an honest heart that a Confederate soldier or slave owner deserves to be officially honored by the same government that employs their elected officials and law enforcement officers? The time has come to redress the white supremacist foundation of our city and honor those who fought for equality or overcame the forces of racism they were subjected to. Professor Matt Sakakeeny, Tulane University. Associate Professor Francis M. Clark. I'm a historian of the American Civil War and Reconstruction, living and teaching in Australia. I spent my entire life and career wondering if the U.S. will ever move beyond its destructive obsession with honoring the Confederacy. For 150 years, those who tried to destroy your country have had the last word. With stunning violence, they overturned democratically elected governments, committed countless acts of racial terrorism, and deluded Americans into believing that the reconciliation required ignoring any history detrimental to the Confederacy. Most stunning of all to me as an outsider, most stunning of all to me as an outsider is all the remarkable histories that have been silenced in order to continue this celebration of traitors. The CCSRC report offers some of these stories. I sincerely hope that you rename your streets and thereby give your wonderful city the inspirational forebears it deserves. The next comment is by Sergio Padilla. It is time for us to remove all references of white supremacy from our public space and honor the rich, diverse history of people that have shaped our great city. I applaud the great effort put forth by the Street Renaming Commission and urge City Council to vote in full support. The next comment is by Scott Eustace. What an exciting report. As a resident of Gentilly, I have already renamed our main street into Robert E. Smalls Boulevard when giving directions. Robert Smalls didn't live in New Orleans and probably didn't have a middle initial, but people understood what and where I'm talking about already, even if people don't know of Robert Smalls, the mariner and congressman. It has already made directions more pleasant. I would support all changes to streets based on the history encoded in this report. It would be especially wonderful to have a street named for Allen Toussaint, as he was such a gentleman. I once met him briefly during one jazz fest and embarrassed myself by thanking him profusely for his work. He would have been within his rights to ignore me, but instead he smiled and thanked me. I would support changing our street to honor such a great New Orleanian, and I think it would give many of us in the neighborhood a daily reminder of the joy of living in our city. Thanks for the opportunity to comment, Scott Eustace. Next comment is by Scott Armand. I think the commission did a great job, and I learned a ton from the final report. Next comment is from Alice Glenn. I applaud the important research done by the commission and ask the council to accept the scholarly recommendations. This is an important, albeit long overdue step in our city's collective history. The next comment is by Mariah Holman. Thanks so much to the board for your hard work on this. As someone who owns property near what is now Palmer Park, I fully support the renaming. Palmer was a terrible person, a racist who endorsed slavery as biblically ordered and helped push the Civil War forward. I have often thought about his crimes as I walk past that park, and his name sullies and dirties a beautiful public space. He doesn't deserve this honor. Please change the name of the park. The next comment is by Ryan J. It is long past time to honor actual heroes rather than upholding ahistorical lost cause white supremacist mythology. The commissioners have done a tremendous job on this report, and it is incumbent upon us as citizens opposed to white supremacy to support them in this work. The next comment is by Bruce Hofer. I attended the November 24th, 2020 Zoom meeting of the Renaming Commission. I have to congratulate Chairman Connor and the commission and its staff for the obvious hard work it has done in attempting to fulfill its stated mission as a street renaming commission. I disagree with what with most of what the commission accomplished here, but it seems like they all worked very hard, were extremely respectful throughout the meeting, courteous and hardworking. The chairman ran a very good business meeting, very professional, very impressive. Having said that, I reject the premise of your commission. Current punishment for past sins is inherently unfair. You know that. We are being punished for things we never, ever did or would ever think of doing. What happened in the past, slavery, injustice, and unequal enforcement of the law, was abhorrent and vile and just plain morally wrong, but we're paying for it today. National policies of slavery were a mortal sin in this country, finally recognized and confronted in the 1860s, and was brave enough to pass legislation to atone for it in 1964 and 1965. The next comment is by Bob Payne. I fully support renaming these streets. New Orleans is a great city, but a lot of our streets and statues still reflect the Confederate ideology that has done such damage to Black people in this country for so long. The names Lee, Lusher, and so many others should be banished. Let's rename all these streets named after such racist Confederates. As a white resident, I believe Black lives matter, and our city should stop keeping its streets named after white supremacists. The next comment is Brandon DuBose. Renaming Robert E. Lee Boulevard for Allen Toussaint is a welcome and wonderful change. Toussaint's contributions to the city, the state, and the overall state of music globally during far outweigh those of General Lee by leaps and bounds. Toussaint owning property along and around the boulevard makes sense for the exact thoroughfare to be born in his honor. The actual street's long distance mimics the musician's illustrious career, intersecting with other avenues, both literally and musically. Please move forward with this change and honor a great New Orleanian with Great New Orleans Boulevard. Next comment is by Elizabeth Kelly. I applaud the commission's excellent work researching and identifying worthy replacement names for our streets and parks. I strongly recommend that the City Council accept these changes and commend the commission at the same time. The next comment is by Anne Braconia. Please consider Oscar Dunn as a candidate for replacement. The next comment is by Lila Hockman. I am a parent and teacher. Renaming our streets to truly, I'm a parent and teacher. Renaming our streets to honor truly honorable people teaches each young generation of the future an important lesson about who we want to be. I have been so thrilled to learn about many admirable residents to New Orleans during this process and look forward to being able to talk to my kids about the educator, artists, and freedom fighters they can admire and model themselves after. The next comment is Chrissy Root. I wholeheartedly register my support for the renaming of these public spaces streets. Names mean something. We must dismantle all vestiges of oppression and have our public spaces reflect the kind of city we claim to be: dynamic, diverse, progressive, and inclusive. So many of these proposals are brilliant and inspiring. I can't imagine how anyone could not get behind Leah Chase Circle and Allen Toussaint Boulevard. The next comment is by Elaine May. I applaud the Street Renaming Commission for replacing so-called lost cause names with the names of those whose names have long been suppressed or forgotten, who were victimized by slavery, Jim Crow, and racial politics that emerged from the lost cause narrative. The change is long overdue. The next comment is by Daniel Garber. Fully support this process to consider renaming city streets. The next comment is by Edward George. We strongly endorse rededicating Palmer Avenue to honor Earl Palmer. His life and work is emblematic of that of working musicians in New Orleans. Plaques honoring him in New Orleans musical heritage could be placed at Palmer and St. Charles Avenue, a block away from Loyola School of Music, and at Ferret and Palmer, visible to Tulane students and visitors. The next comment is by Stephen Wilcox. As a Tulane graduate and frequent visitor to NOLA and true lover of the city, I think the proposed name changes would be a great thing. I shouldn't have to explain to my daughter why the city is honoring traitors who fought to preserve slavery, particularly knowing that the names were the product of a conscious effort to reinforce white supremacy, and it would be great to honor the true heroes of New Orleans, like Allen Toussaint and Henry Roland Byrd, who haven't received their due of civic honors. Next comment is by Jacqueline Stern. We fully support the name change of Palmer Avenue as longtime residents on the street. The next comment is by Julie Chapman. After having reviewed the background of CCRC CCSRC Commission, my question is, how many were born and raised in New Orleans, a city of great culture? Do you know the history of Treme being a slave and then a slave owner? Does anyone know the history of Congo Square? How about Zulu and Rex toasting our mayor and city council from Gallier Hall? I take great offense to this ever being about white supremacy because that is not who we are today. History has a place, and if any one of this council or commission would like to educate themselves with local people, please call me and you could have a better understanding of the good people that have come from our past in our great city of New Orleans. Our city councilwoman is named Palmer. What do we do with her name? Unfortunately, what you thought you were writing is wrong in the path you have chosen. We want to educate and dedicate Palmer Avenue to a native son who achieved great success around the world. If anything was so awful about New Orleans, take a moment and think of all the greatness that comes from us that makes us special in the world. Let us move forward and set a good example of righting wrongs and not tearing down our city. Knowledge is power. The next comment is by Michael Tisserand. I write to encourage the council to consider the recommendations for the naming of pioneering journalist, writer, and civil rights visionary, Dr. Louis Charles Rudinez, to be substituted for Capitol Street. The next comment is by Lynette Dostie. Rudinez to replace Capitol. I would like to encourage the renaming commission to take a closer look at the heartbeat of the city, to honor those who honored life and the well-being of others, to uphold the labor of those who come before us, to say your hard work was not in vain. This day you will receive your recognition, not because you asked for it, but because you earned it by blood and tears in which we benefit to this day. The next comment is by Gregory Martin. I am commenting on the City Council Streets Renaming Commission, CCSRC, initial report. Specifically, I'm addressing the CCSRC's recommendation for renaming General Early Drive. I am an educational historian and property owner who resides on General Early Drive. My family and I are pleased that the CCSRC is recommending renaming our street in honor of President Albert W. Dent. However, we are proposing the renamed street shows President Dent's full name, Albert W. Dent. We are proposing to rename the street as Albert W. Dent Drive. The proposed name meets the renaming requirements. It also provides context. Young people or anyone interested in knowing for whom the street honors would have no trouble researching the name and understanding the purpose for the street's name. Simply renaming the street as Dent Drive does not give full recognition to the people, to the person who was an educator who worked for social justice and inclusion. The next comment is by Helen Marie. I support the nomination of Dr. Louisa Charles Rudinez as replacement for Capitol Street. Thank you. The next comment is by Grace Hoffer. I request Palmer Avenue be renamed Earl Palmer Avenue. The next comment is by Catherine Wheeler. I am submitting comment to urge the committee to finish the job, remove the remaining statues of exploiters and oppressors immediately. This canon should be done in advance of decisions on what can be put in their place. The very presence of these monuments promote trauma in the hearts and minds of the residents of our city. Citizens have been forced to act of their own accord for the liberation from this trauma. They should not be persecuted for advancing their freedom from terror. Drop all trumped up charges against those accused of allegedly removing the John McDonough bus. Flip the budget and fund children, families, and living wage job development, not police. The police force in America was created for the sole purpose of terror. We need community oversight, civilian review board with subpoena powers, investigative powers, and powers to bring criminal charges against the police because police will not police themselves. Only the people can do it. Instead of giving any tax exemption to the rich while you squeeze the working class poor of our city, require all big businesses to pay and then ensure a fully funded relocation of Gordon Plaza to ensure the residents of Gordon Plaza are compensated for their homes as a result of the city of New Orleans building their homes on toxic soil and still charging them taxes on soil that is being the second highest cancer causing area in the entire state of Louisiana. The wrongs need to be made right. It is long overdue to be addressed. For Black lives, fight for Black lives while we yet live. The next comment is by Michelle Payne. This process is important as it provides your community with the opportunity to have a complete historical narrative. The next comment is by Susan Larson. I would like to support the Renaming Commission's work in choosing street name honorees that more fully reflect the history of our city. Reading this report, lengthy as it is an education in that long, complicated history. This renaming project, I hope, will lead us to a better appreciation of our fellow citizens and begin to redress some of the divisions that have plagued us to the present day. The next comment is by Tara Hines. I would like to applaud the work of the group researching and suggesting more honorable names of our streets. Moreover, I am particularly excited and hopeful about the possibility of Leah Chase Circle and Father Toomey Street. Many thanks, Tara Hines. The next comment is by Sophia Khan. I support renaming of these streets and the efforts to broaden the rich history of the city by including the narrative and culture of underrepresented peoples. And honoring those enslaved here is an important part of American history that gets overlooked. Good job to this team for all their well thought out proposals and research. Thank you. Next comment is by Sarah Wagner. I'm so glad that our commissioners are discussing renaming and re-honoring. By renaming streets to local heroes such as Joseph Giame, we have the opportunity to teach locals and tourists a more complete history of New Orleans. Let's embrace all 300 years of history by honoring the Americans that fought for their freedom and to build a better New Orleans during slavery, Reconstruction, and Jim Crow. Thank you. The next comment is by Kayas Sahin. When I lived in New Orleans between 2008 and 2012, I was often puzzled by the imprint of Confederate and antebellum past on the city's streets and monuments. The New Orleans I discovered and loved had a much more sophisticated, much more participatory, much more emancipatory history than the one imposed on its landscape by a small section of its inhabitants. As a historian working on rituals and ceremonies, I know how important streets and monuments are and how vital it is for a community to name them in reflection of its best values and traditions. I applaud the efforts towards renaming the streets of New Orleans to honor the dazzling richness of the city's culture, past and present, beyond the authoritarian and violent divisions of an entitled elite. The next comment is by Natasha Zaretsky. I write in full support of the CCSRC to examine how the city of New Orleans can take a lead in confronting its past and commemorating the struggles of the African Americans in the long fight for freedom and equality. I teach history at the University of Alabama at Birmingham, a city that is also reckoning with its past and trying to figure out how that past can best be reflected in our shared built environment. I also love New Orleans and fully support the CCSRC's efforts to do this crucial work and help the city live up to its noblest ideals and aspirations. The next comment is by Jacob Germain. Thank you for the work you've done on this. It's long past time we fix this history. The next comment is by Justin Zittler. I propose an authentic theme approach. Renaming is a one-time branding opportunity, or better, a public rebranding of the modern New Orleans. Every citizen has their favorites. Personally, I concur with Moore Mariel's top two, Dorothy Mae Taylor, and the Honorable Revis Ortiz for the reasons he stated. Other than these remarkable individuals and Norman Francis, I respectfully suggest a lighter theme, one that serves double duty as a marketing tool as well. The theme of New Orleans music is populated by the likes of Fats Domino, Alan Toussaint, Professor Longhair, Louis Moreau, Gottschalk, C.F. John, and many more. These are our folks whose names and works are respected internationally. If Nashville can simply designate itself as Music City, thereby reaping significant back office music business locations, then let New Orleans show all the world that we are truly America's music city. Tourists will love it, and we New Orleanians will as well. The next comment is by Timothy Favreau. I strongly object to the renaming of Palmer Avenue. I have lived on Palmer for over 20 years, and I know firsthand that virtually no one on Palmer knew of and or cared who Benjamin Palmer was. I seriously doubt that more than a small handful of people in the city knew who he was either. The disruption and inconvenience that will be caused to all Palmer Avenue by renaming the street is not justified in the name of a crusade against an obscure, long-forgotten minor historical figure. If this effort must go forward, let the people of Palmer vote and decide for themselves whether to change the name. And if the name is to be changed, let the people of Palmer Avenue choose the name change. This is called democracy. Ramming a new street name down the throats of Palmer Avenue residents by unelected bureaucrats is not democracy, it is tyranny. It is the powers that, if the powers that be insist on changing the name without the consent of the residents of Palmer Avenue, please rededicate the street to Earl Palmer, a legendary musician. This would be a win-win for everyone. The next comment is by Mary Cloud. Finish the job of taking down all symbols to white supremacy and oppression now. We have known for years with statues, street names, etc., school names, etc., be solved. The longer the delay, the clearer it is that the city council does not take this important job seriously, an important issue seriously. Additionally, all of the changes against those who allegedly, all of the charges against those who allegedly took down the John McDonough statue bust must be dropped. Lastly, the fact that the residents of Gordon Plaza are still living on toxic soil is clear evidence of the oppression and abuse caused by white supremacy. The residents of Gordon Plaza need a fully funded relocation. If Black Lives Matter to the city, the symptom of white supremacy will be dealt with in ways requested by the residents themselves immediately. All right. Next comment is by Edward Benjamin. The harm we are all seeking to address is the renaming of the part of Henry Clay Avenue between St. Charles Avenue and Claiborne Avenue as Palmer Avenue by the City Council over 100 years ago. The question is how to best address this harm. The simplest option is to repeal the City Council action honoring Reverend Palmer and keeping the name Palmer Avenue, since no one knew who Palmer Avenue was named for, and Palmer is a common last name. But that could allow people to think Palmer Avenue was still named for Reverend Palmer, which is unacceptable. A better solution is to rededicate Palmer Avenue. I advocate doing this and honoring New Orleans' own Rock and Roll Hall of Fame drummer, Earl Palmer. Earl Palmer was born, raised, and worked in New Orleans his entire life. So I suggest that Palmer Avenue become Earl Palmer Avenue and be named for a pioneering local Hall of Fame musician whose omission from the list of names for renaming streets shocks me. The solution honors someone whose name should be on a New Orleans street. Now I want to address the processes of the renaming commission. A number of Palmer Avenue residents wrote the commission to suggest the name Earl Palmer Avenue and included articles on his career and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. But Earl Palmer's name was not even brought up as a possible name the commission put forth for Palmer Avenue. The names that were put forth by the commission came from a survey developed by the expert panel. That survey somehow did not include the residents of Palmer Avenue. The District A representative, Paul Sturbko, moved to rededicate Palmer Avenue to the great jazz drummer Earl Palmer as Earl Palmer Avenue. It was voted down because this would dilute the effectiveness of what we are trying to do here as a commission, which is righting wrongs rooted in real injustices to real people. Clearly, no one on the commission had bothered to looking Earl Palmer's life as a pioneering musician and the injustices he faced. How did that happen? The input of residents was not considered by the renaming commission. The city council meeting now functions to address that problem and take the residents' input into account, especially for Palmer Avenue. The names of the expert panel suggested for Palmer Avenue were, and that is 2 minutes.
Andrew, I'm just going to interrupt you real quickly to say that the commission definitely looked at all of the suggestions, including that of Earl Palmer. I would hope that the residents of that street would take seriously our comments about the appearance that it is a veiled attempt to keep the name Palmer as opposed to actually changing the name to honor someone more deserving than Reverend Benjamin Palmer. Again, this is an initial process. We're welcoming those conversations. We can continue to talk about it in a constructive manner, but I just ask that they think about it from the perspective of the commissioners who are trying to make sure that there is not simply a thinly veiled attempt to keep the name Palmer there, as opposed to going forward with the purpose of the commission. Thank you.
Okay, the next comment is by Michael Wallace. There are so many other matters that should have priority by the New Orleans City Council than this. While I understand the desire that there are things the City Council can do to help citizens that have been suffering this year and into 2021. What are the plans for the city to deal with the large lack of revenue from a shutdown of festivals, conventions, and events that are the primary economy of New Orleans? We need to be focused on how to save the city and prepared to emerge from this current situation. The next comment is by Tracy Conlin Dreeling. As a resident of Calhoun Street for 21 years, it is disheartening to think of a street name change for my family. This is the only address that our 3 children know and identify with. We in no way condone the historic implications of the namesake of Calhoun Street. However, we acknowledge that a name change does in no way change the past. With that being said, we also recognize that the commission has already decided that a name change is to take place. We are practicing Catholics and are not all offended by the proposed choice of Father Twum. Yet we feel it is not the best representation of the street. We ask that you please consider working with the residents to find a more suitable street name choice. Some great examples are Park Avenue or University Avenue. Thank you for your consideration. Respectfully, the Dreeling family. The next comment is by Tiffany Guillory Thomas. I would like to state my support for the renaming of Capitol Street and that it be renamed in honor of historic hero Dr. Louis Charles Rudenez. As in this time of rebirth of the civil rights efforts and in line with the very nature of this renaming initiative, I think Dr. Rudenez and the founder of the first Black daily newspaper, which fearlessly championed civil rights, is most fitting and well-deserved for this honor. He is a historical figure, a pioneer, and his life and work are still influencing people who study New Orleans, Louisiana history, and civil rights both here and all over the country. The next comment is by Woodson Joseph Sandberg. Remove the names and statues of white supremacy. Drop all charges of those accused of allegedly removing the John McDonough bust. Name streets after influential women in POC that have been historically ignored. This is not erasing history, it is celebrating diversity of influential people and being honest about their ugly past. The next comment is by Chantel Pierre. The renaming of streets and public places in New Orleans to the proposed names more accurately reflect our history and the positive qualities of this city. We are diverse, resilient, and talented. Let's fully tell this story. The next comment is by Charles Marsala. I've emailed the members of the commission a 20+ page partial analysis of the CCSRC report. In the time, yeah, but it's on a different agenda. Sorry, I'll start that again. I've emailed the members of the commission a 20+ page partial analysis of the CCSRC report. In the time allowed, I will cover some major points in my report. There are 4 chapters. 1, recognizing Italian contributions and Little Palermo. 2, Victory Circle as a Blue Star and Gold Star Memorial. 3, reviewing the report. 4, asking what is not mentioned in the report. Chapter 1, thank you for the Dr. Sherwood Woody Galliano recommendation and consideration of Louis Prima. My suggestion would be to allow the Italian community to choose the names of however many streets the commission determines the Italian community warrants. In my email, I included several who contributed to New Orleans. Please visit my YouTube channel, AWE News, as there are 8 playlists of 30 minutes each on the Sicilian migration to New Orleans. Chapter 2, Victory Circle to honor veterans as a Blue and Gold Star Memorial. The circle 400 feet from the World War II museums should be considered to honor those who served, are serving, and will serve in our military. We are suggesting it be called Victory Circle. Over 80 cities in Louisiana have Blue Star markers and gardens, but New Orleans does not. I made a video on what other Louisiana cities have done to honor veterans, Blue Star, Gold Star, and Victory Circle to honor military near the National World War II Museum. Please take a minute to watch it. Our website is www.victorycircle.org, and we have a Facebook page. Ms. Chase and other civil rights leaders would be honored at Duncan Plaza. Chapter 3, I have commented on the report on an earlier agenda item. I will add some comments. Robert E. Lee was in New Orleans on multiple trips and was likely the first Union officer in New Orleans after Louisiana seceded. Prior to that, he was stationed at Jackson Barracks and likely in charge of the forces prior to the Mexican-American War. In 1841, he was in charge of the Mississippi River Valley and named the man who tamed the Mississippi. New Orleans river commerce benefited greatly from this engineering. And that is 2 minutes. The next comment is by Richmond. If street names were only about enabling people to find their way around the city or to have packages or emergency services show up at the location, then a simple set of numbers and letters would suffice. But we know that street names are more than a collection of coordinates. They celebrate people and events and other elements important to the city. They commemorate the aspects of the city the aspects the city collectively wishes to honor. They educate the residents and visitors about the people and the history that helped make the place what it is. In keeping with those principles, I am submitting that this short comment to let the members of the committee know how thrilled I am this initiative is going. As a native of New Orleans, I grew up around street names and monuments that frequently made me roll my eyes in irritation. Calhoun, really? Or cringe and embarrass me? Jeff Davis, we really think we need to honor that guy? Or squint and puzzle me? Leonidas, the Spartan guy, why here? So what it would like to consider the possibility of having streets that celebrate our multi-ethnic, multi-talented, multi-faith, multilingual heritage, to turn into Toussaint Boulevard and to find myself humming a few bars, to recall Leah Chase's unmatched cooking as I headed downtown past what used to be Place de Tivoli. Celebrating our musical riches with street names for Dr. John, for Sidney Bechet, for Buddy Bolden and Mahalia Jackson and Ellis Marcellus and Jelly Roll Morton and Louis Prima is long overdue. It would bring the city to life for visitors and residents alike to hear the music and the names of our city streets. As important as remembering those whom histories are excluded for so long, why commemorate a class of men, many with only the most tenuous connections to this area, who dedicate their lives to maintaining structures that privilege people like them and oppress everyone else? Why not offer what little we can to the names of those who bravely resisted enslavement? Men and women like Celestine, Georges, Jasper, and Margaret Elizabeth, and like the Maroons of St. Malo. Much of our history has been obscure for a very long time, and that is 2 minutes. The next comment is by Norman Whitley. I think you should stop naming streets after people. I say that reluctantly because women have gotten a raw deal in New Orleans for nearly 300 years. Firstly, people are all imperfect and have feet of clay. Some people have done good things even though they were not in fact good people. Some people have done really good things but had major character flaws. If we are to honor people with naming a street or a plaza or a building after them, should it be that we ignore those feet of clay? Secondly, the importance of people diminishes with time. Should we name a street after someone and then leave it the way that way just because of inertia, even though the citizenry have no clue what that person did or stood for 50, 100, 200 years ago? Name streets after what those important people aspired to, struggled for. That seems a better, more honest way to honor their history and ours. The next comment is by Patrick Dorio. I completely support this process and the incredible necessary work that this commission has done. While these renamings continue to reverse the legacy of white supremacy and hate that plagues our city and our country as a whole, they bring to fuller light those who fought for justice and who turned New Orleans into the city we love. I look forward to the day when our children look at these street names and ask, instead of John Calhoun and PGT Beauregard, who Father Twomey or Doris Jean Castle are. Twomey and Castle were people like us, I'll say, who knew a better world was possible. I am happy to have them on signs to guide our way. Thank you. The next comment is by Jessica Dorman. I am writing to express my strong support for the CCSRC initial report. As an educator, public historian, I have been filled with pride for my city as I watch the process unfold. The renaming commission approached the complicated task with sensitivity. Their comprehensive report on the history behind current street names and their thoughtful, thorough descriptions of possible replacement names is a model of historical objectivity and inclusivity. Renaming our city streets is not a punitive act, it is an educational imperative, and it's long overdue. The city and the city council has approached this challenge in a measured, admirable way. What a wonderful opportunity for New Orleans to serve as a model for the rest of the nation. History is alive, history is relevant, and we all have a voice in writing the next chapter. The next comment is by Mark Rudenay. Thanks to the CCSRC and expert panel for their considerable work on this project. As a sixth-generation New Orleanian who cares deeply about our city's history, I carefully read every page of the expert panel's initial and final reports. I poured through the excellent bios of 3 who should be considered as potential nominees to reconsecrate each street and park stained by the heroes of white supremacy. There is a rich and proud history behind every candidate named in the report. I will continue to recommend Dr. Louis Charles Rudenay, civil rights visionary and founder of America's first Black daily, to replace Capitol. Renee was ranked on top of the final report's list for the renaming of Capitol Street. I urge the commission to follow the expert panel's recommendations. The next comment is by Jeffrey Goodman. I would like to commend this commission for the proposed changes and for all the work that has led to them. They are a long overdue correction to the city's landscape and collective sense of place. Imagine writing a history of New Orleans based solely on the people we currently honor with our streets, parks, and public spaces. What story would that tell? What history would that include, and what history would that leave out? The current narrative does not illuminate, it obscures, and does not broaden our understanding or our past, but limits the conception of who we are, who we were, are, or could be. Looking at this list of new names and reading about all they did, all they accomplished, it fills me with pride. It is inspiring to learn about people from all walks of life, from all eras of our city, who embodied the hope, the courage, and the creativity of a better New Orleans. They were people who fought for the things that are still worth fighting for. It is hard to say the same for our current street names. The next comment is by Andrew Graff. On behalf of the board of the Historic Faubourg Treme Association, HFTA, and those members who are submitted input to the organization, HFTA is advocating for the renaming of Governor Nicholson Street from its starting point at the river up to Claiborne Avenue to Bayou Road. This would return the street to its original name and make it contiguous with the portion of Bayou Road that runs from Claiborne to its terminus at Broad. Furthermore, the section of Governor Nichols that doglegs off at Claiborne and runs lakebound from Claiborne to Broad, we propose be renamed after Lolis Ellie, which is one of the proposals of the commission's list for the entirety of the span through Treme and Rampart. We feel that these proposals make sense both physically, as Bayou Road currently changes names at Claiborne running riverbound and would create added continuity, as well as socially, as honoring Mr. Alley would still be achieved on the section that terminates at Claiborne going riverbound. We are apprised of the fact that the various folks in the French Quarter want the section that runs through the corridor to be renamed Hospital in reference to its colonial name, referring to the long gone hospital. We feel this is a poor decision for a name on its face. Hospital ain't there no more. It was a colonial era name, which is a part of what we feel this commission was trying to eliminate, remedy, etc. As well as a poor decision socially to once again segregate the quarter from the rest of the city and the adjacent neighborhood. These sentiments were in fact echoed by Mr. Ellie's son, Lois Eric Ellie. Whatever the commission and this council finally decide, we appreciate your attention to the opinions and concerns of the residents of Treme. Thank you for your time. Best, Andrew Graff, HFTA Land Use Chair. The next comment is by Andrew Faria. Thank you for these thoughtful suggestions. I especially appreciate the inclusion of the names of people who escaped from enslavement. Besides their examples to an alternate form of heroism that isn't about force, I think it's also important to have monuments pointing towards how much history is unknown to us and why some parts are more mysterious than others. The next comment is by Sarah Duggan. As a historian and proud New Orleans resident, I fully support the CCSRC proposals to rename streets currently named for Confederate leaders and other white supremacists. This isn't erasing history. Those people will still be a part of the historical record and the story of Louisiana. Rather, it makes room to tell more history, expanding our view of the Crescent City and its residents whose contributions deserve greater recognition. City street names have changed in the past, and it's time to do it again. Instead of being complacent about monuments to men who waged an unsuccessful national conflict, let's highlight New Orleanians who work to make their communities a better place. I'm particularly a fan of renaming Lee Circle for Leah Chase. The similar sound will make it an easy transition. Next comment is by Laura Murphy. I'm writing as a citizen to New Orleans and a scholar of slavery to commend the New Orleans City Council and the scholars who conducted their research for producing a responsible and responsive report and a plan for urgent change in New Orleans. Changing the names of our city streets is so much more than window dressing. It is a commitment to our citizens and to the world that we denounce the racism of the past and seek to thoughtfully and critically forge a new direction for race relations in our city. While it is true that no street name will solve the systematic injustices that the majority of our citizens suffer each day, heeding the call to remove the ubiquitous celebrations of slavery that mar our city and celebrate the diverse citizens who have made it a vibrant cultural capital is an important step to undermining our shameful and pervasive cultural racism. This simple but bold move will be a model for other cities across the country. I hope that it is merely the beginning of the City Council's response to the community's calls to address the rampant inequalities in housing, education, employment, healthcare, income, policing, and infrastructure in this city. The next comment is by Thomas Smith. Thank you to the commission and to the city for taking the necessary long overdue action to reconcile the place names and physical markers that glorify the history of white supremacy in New Orleans. The impact that a built environment with plentiful reminders of oppression across scales and over centuries has on its citizens is profound and shapes the image of our community. Who are we? More importantly, what do we want to be? I am encouraged that the proposed renaming recommendations broaden our understanding of local history, of the strength, resilience, and achievement of tremendous people, by telling the stories of New Orleanians that have been ignored, held down, and erased from our collective knowledge. It is well past time to recommend them, to say their names, to commemorate how they help make us. When looking at our street names, public spaces, and statues, it's hard to know that we as a city of longstanding ethnic and racial diversity, home to a range of civil rights causes, and full of caring, compassionate, and creative people who stood up for themselves, for others, for our community. In the near future, I want to see places in our cities that have flipped the story around to recognize New Orleanians of different backgrounds, locations, and moments in time who have ultimately made our home the layered collage it is. I know we have a problem when most things are named after people who look like me, a white man, in a city known for its historic diversity. We have an unprecedented chance to show the world who we really are, a community of advocates, lawyers, educators, chiefs, musicians, formerly enslaved people, indigenous people, people who care. The time is now. Let's do this. And finally, I believe that Lee Circle should have a generic name. It should not be named in honor of a person. I personally prefer the original name of Tivoli Circle. I also think the more generic name should be used for more streets. Next comment is by Shannon Williamson. Born and raised in New Orleans, I've spent the last 12 years working in higher education in the city, first at Dillard University and now at the University of New Orleans. I urge the City Council to act swiftly to change the names of streets and monuments honoring Confederate military officers or civic leaders that engaged in racist and segregationist practices. Every day for the last decade, I have spent time supporting some of the best and brightest young people in New Orleans. They come to the university with big dreams to change the world. The city they live in should reflect their diversity and visionary hope. We must honor a more complete picture of history and uplift leaders like the Dent family and Herman Midler. There is so much more hope, courage, and faith that could adorn our street names. Black Lives Matter, and our streets and city structures must honor that. The next comment is by John Ludlam. The Street Renaming Commission's initial report offers New Orleanians a long overdue opportunity to update how we refer to some of the most important places in our city. Far too long, our streets and places have upheld the mantle of white supremacy, printed in bright, reflective blue and white. They forced many Black New Orleanians to read, write, and speak the names of those who would have enslaved them given the chance. Enshrining the memory of the White League leadership or the top brass of the Confederacy is a desecration of our public spaces and an offense especially targeted at Black New Orleanians. It must be rectified. One of the great joys I have had this year has been referring to the gorgeous boulevard that runs through Mid-City as Norman Francis Parkway. While I know the formal renaming won't occur until New Year, I figure why wait? From 2017 to 2019, I worked as a designer and outreach coordinator for Paper Monuments, a public art and history project, asking New Orleanians to imagine new monuments in the city. I had the privilege of talking to hundreds of folks about the stories they want to see told in New Orleans public spaces. Obvious suggestions such as places named for Leah Chase and Alan Toussaint took their place beside more obscure references, such as monuments to an old record store on Washington Avenue, or a monument to the Bengali presence in the early 20th century to men. This is to say, New Orleans history is made up of stories both widely known and widely unknown, which the initial report recognizes so well. It is also past time to recognize those figures in New Orleans history that have fought for more than just New Orleans, which the report does by highlighting people like Lois Ellis Sr. and Francis Joseph Gaudet. Street names aren't just trivial things in New Orleans. Our city's brilliant second nines, Mardi Gras Indians, and Mardi Gras parades move through them year after year. It's about time we honored that important street name rooted in justice rather than oppression. The next comment is by Stephen Bellflower. This comment is regarding Lee Circle. The remaining pedestal and column are designed in the style of a military war memorial and would be unfitting to be rededicated to a civilian, however notable they may be. I believe the monument should be rededicated to our veterans and the street renamed Veterans Circle or revert to its original name, Tivoli Circle. However, if the city possessed the funding to demolish the existing military style monument and create a new public space, the name of the street and space should reflect its new purpose. The next comment is from Shadrach A. Small. As the son of a New Orleans native, I am in full support of the CCSRC's recommendations for the city's street names. Removing Confederate monuments, be they statues or street names, does not obliterate our shared history. It merely makes clear that they no longer wish to honor a failed state that fractured our union in order to preserve chattel slavery. I'm especially in favor of renaming the boulevard as Allen Toussaint Boulevard. New Orleans music is one of the greatest gifts to the country and the world, and few exemplify the city's proud and inimitable musical heritage better than Toussaint. Next comment is by Ashley Howard. I write this afternoon in support of renaming streets throughout the city of New Orleans to better represent our city's multi-ethnic, multicultural heritage, as well as our commitment to recognizing past wrongs to bring forth a brighter future. As a scholar of African American history, a Black mother, and a former General Taylor Street homeowner, I cannot stress enough the symbolic and actual importance of approving these changes. The contributions of African descended people are the major influence in what makes this city unique and draws people from around the world to visit. By acknowledging the historical and cultural contributions, we are making a meaningful change in honoring those contributors, not just profiting from the tourism dollars that they bring to the city. Additionally, the legacy of Confederacy physically courses through the cityscape, literally and figuratively bifurcating literally the community. What are the lessons of all children, but especially Black children, learn when they walk down Calhoun Street or catch beads on Lee Circle and ask their parents about the origins of those thoroughfares' names? That some people's humanity is deemed less worthy than others, and they reside in the city committed to maintaining that narrative. A name change ushers in a value change. Father Louis Cuomo worked towards racial justice and workers' rights. Miss Leah Chase fed the bellies and souls of politicians, activists, and generations of New Orleanians alike. These are the values of New Orleans. One where we lead from the front, not lean on the myth of moonlight and magnolia. It is for these reasons and so many others that I wholeheartedly support the proposed name changes, the least of which that Professor Longhair Street will look great on a driver's license. The next comment is by Katie Fronek. I support the recommendations from the Streets Renaming Commission report. I believe our built environment should reflect a full and accurate history and should honor those who represent the best of us. No one is perfect, but names are powerful, and it is never appropriate to give power recognition to those who represent racism and the enslavement of people, a platform to show up in everyday life. I am excited for this opportunity to honor those who fought for the betterment of all and contributed to the lasting and unique culture of New Orleans. I am especially excited by the recommendation for naming near Lakeview to reflect the people who fought to liberate themselves, and with a personal tie to landscape architecture for Joseph Bartholomew. Thank you. The next comment is from Jenny Schwartzberg. I wholeheartedly support the street renaming process and would like to express my gratitude to the commission members and expert panel for the time and energy they have devoted to this project. The way in which we as a community interpret our history reveals so much about what and who we value. Elevating and remembering the names of New Orleanians who have prioritized equality, equity, and justice, people like Mahalia Jackson, Rudy Lombard, and Doris Jean Castle, is a step in the right direction. Next comment is by Father Daniel H. Green. Many thanks to the members of the expert panel for the research they compiled to support the work of the commission. The names they put forth were vast and represent the best of what New Orleans has to offer in terms of human capital. Specifically, I would like to strongly support the proposal to rename Lee Circle to Leah Chase Circle. Ms. Chase was an icon in the New Orleans culinary community and is revered around the world for the work she did in her kitchen. Yet I remember her most fondly for the way she lived out her faith and fought to change the world. She utilized her gift to bring about inspirational change in a world often so darkened by sin and hate. I also support the proposed naming Mignon Street in honor of Dylan French Cole. As an avid viewer of City Council's proceedings for my teen years, I can attest to the fierce and tenacious spirit of Mama D. Excuse me. Let me start that again. I also support the proposed renaming of Mignon Street in honor of Diane French Cole. As an avid viewer of City Council proceedings from my teen years, I can attest to the fierce and tenacious spirit of Mama D. She never shied away from offering her opinion and often went against the grain in pushing for a more equitable approach to governing in New Orleans. She was a mother of the community and sought not only to represent her own family, but the entire community. Both these women are exemplary for their witness and should be put forth unto the systemic oppression that the current names have inflicted upon the city for decades. I urge the commission to continue its work and bring this project to the city council for ultimate adoption. While some might see these as pure symbolic steps in the fight for equity and justice, symbols bear meaning and show the outside world who we really are and what we really believe. May we show the world that we are ready to take steps to heal our city and move towards a more equitable New Orleans. Next comment is by Millard Morrison. I would like to echo many people's opinions of this matter. I'm a lifelong New Orleanian and a recent resident of Palmer Ave. I am deeply saddened and disappointed by the potential of a name change to our street. I think that keeping the name Palmer Ave and rededicating it to Earl Palmer is a wonderful idea and wouldn't allow not just members of Palmer Ave, but all New Orleans who use the streets and visitors to learn more about this wonderful New Orleans legend. Next comment is by Dennis Wilson. I am 100% in favor of changing street names. Thank you. Next comment is by Zachary Banks. It is paramount that streets that contain the names of slave owners, Confederate, treasonous generals, and soldiers be taken down immediately. Being an African American and living in the city of predominantly Black and brown citizens, it is traumatizing to see the names of and constantly have to reference men who own people who look like me. Rename the streets. The next comment is from Bridget Conroy. Dear Commissioners, I'm writing to voice my support and gratitude for the work done by the panel of experts. This is an incredible document, and I'm so excited to see this kind of care and attention given to the history of New Orleans. I believe that it is important to remove the harmful legacy of the lost cause narrative from our city's public spaces. This report provides a point of entry into so many remarkable lives, cultural worlds, and social movements that might begin to better tell the history of this place. I encourage the Commission to adopt these recommendations, and I look forward to seeing some of these names around the city. Thank you, Bridget Conroy. The next comment is by Sally Seaman. Please rename Lee Circle something representative of the city as a whole, such as Jazz or Music Circle, or our very beginnings, such as Lemoyne Circle. Such names would surely be embraced by all citizens and objected to by none. Tulane Avenue could be renamed Leah Chase Avenue. In a separate mail-in ballot, since not all residents have access to the internet, residents and businesses on the streets whose names are being proposed for changes should be polled for suggestions. Next comment is by Kevin Fitzpatrick. As we move deeper into the 21st century, history compels us to begin to shake ourselves loose from our racist past. And we look to those who have inspired us for racial justice and inclusion, and to have those names enshrined in our city rather than those who have worked to support a legacy of white supremacy. Next comment is by Shelby Mills. I want to voice my support for the renaming process as a whole. It is a healing aspect of our city to promote the importance of Black lives and an intersectional view of history. Renaming our streets to reflect contemporary sensitive moral values is important in the context of this city, which has been deeply affected by structural inequality of the white supremacists whose names are present here. The next comment is by Bill Vandermeer. I respectfully disagree with the wholesale renaming of streets to replace those whose names were associated with slavery, be it a teacher, politician, or a soldier. There's certainly a moral issue here. I think that anyone with a strong moral compass would agree that slavery was a dark chapter in our nation's history. However, I question the need to help heap recriminations or symbolically deny the existence of those who've gone before us who may have either directly or indirectly supported slavery. To a large degree, many of them have atoned by having also made significant contributions to our community. That should not go unrecognized. With regards to the individuals remembered by having streets named after them, I challenge the commission to decree that those folks have never made an immoral decision or committed an indiscretion in their lives. Secondly, the sheer volume of the proposed changes involve significant logistical implications for those affected residents and business owners. I question whether the commission has in fact sought input from every one of those directly affected. If not, they should have been. Next comment is by Ann Case. The biographical sketch of Paul Tulane gives generalities about how businesses were run during the antebellum period, but does not address Paul Tulane's specific business or his personal or philanthropic ideology. In a time when it was socially acceptable to do so, Paul Tulane did not own slaves or have African-American servants or workers. Although he founded his mercantile company in New Orleans in the mid-1820s, Tulane began importing ready-made clothing out of New York by 1828 and moved his manufacturing operations to his factories in New Jersey, thus avoiding the exploitation of antebellum slave labor. With the income from the mercantile business, Tulane bought property in New Orleans. Rent from the real estate was his main and continued source of income, and the sake of the sale of those properties funded Tulane University in the 1880s. Tulane retired and moved back to New Jersey in the 1850s and only lived in New Orleans during the war, in order to keep from having his property seized. Although the claim that he was one of the largest private donors to the Confederacy is often repeated on the internet, I have never been able to trace the source nor verify the fact. Per the 2014 article, Financing the Civil War, the Confederacy was funded 35% through borrowing, 56% through printing money, and 9% by raising taxes. There is no mention of private donors. When Tulane decided to give my entire estate to New Orleans for the benefit of education to that city, he contacted a stranger, Randall Lee Gibson, a lawyer and senator who was the son of an old friend. Wartime political leanings had nothing to do with whom Tulane chose to contact. It was all about his money, Louisiana's taxation laws, the fear that his donation would be squandered by the city or state through taxation, and who he thought might be influential enough to change tax laws. Tulane's donation took years to complete because Tulane initially refused to sign the original letter and act of donation composed for him by administrators Gibson, and that is 2 minutes. Thanks, man. I think we have about 30 minutes.
Andrew, what number are you on now?
So it's can't tell you exactly. It looks like we have about 20 or 30 left.
Okay, I just hope the public will stick in with us and continue to listen. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I hope your voice lasts.
You and me both. Let's see. All right. Next comment is by Michael Duplantier. Street renaming is delicate and controversial matter that should not proceed further until the shutdown is fully lifted and until the interested members of the public, especially the citizens directly affected by any proposed street name change, can have the full and sufficient opportunity to properly participate in the process and be actively and meaningfully engaged in all aspects of this proposal. The public meeting restrictions have prevented anything remotely resembling adequate public notice and participation by the citizenry, and it's antithetical to good and normative planning practices. Any committee deliberations or recommendations lacking this critically important public engagement are flawed and cannot be said to have proceeded on the strength of public consensus or on fundamental fairness and objectivity. Next comment is by Cornell Celestine. Please consider Mark Charles Rudenay name. Next comment is by Afton Barber. Dear Street Renaming Commission, I appreciate the level of effort that went into the initial report. From my research of 15 years, I would, however, like to offer a list of names of deserving candidates for replacement. I was surprised that most of these are not already included. Many of these individuals should be more prominent in history, and this step would be a beginning. They include Major Francis E. Dumas, the first and only of 2 African-American majors in the Union Army, almost a Republican candidate for governor in 1868. Captain Andre Cailloux led African-Americans in the Battle of Port Hudson in July 1863. He died on the battlefield and had a hero's funeral. Deserves a Medal of Honor and a statue. His heroics were communicated by General Banks to the White House, proving that the men of color would indeed fight valiantly for the Union. Arnold Bertineau delivered a petition signed by free men of color to President Lincoln in 1864, conveying their request for suffrage substantiated by the fact that they paid taxes on millions of dollars of property. He served in the Union Army, also brought the first suit to solve unfair, unequal public schools. The Rudenay brothers, Dr. Charles and Jean-Baptiste, publisher, editor of the Union and Tribune, and publisher that pushed for civil rights. Jean-Baptiste also traveled to DC with Bertineau. Dr. A.P. Dostie, a white abolitionist that fought for civil rights for all. He is a martyr killed at the Mechanics Hall Massacre of 1866. General John Phelps formed the 1st Regiment of Colored Soldiers in camp at Carrollton. Resisted having colored soldiers doing menial tasks. Resigned from the Union Army in protest. Palmer Park could be Phelps Park. General Benjamin Butler, Union commander when New Orleans was taken in April-May 1862. Authorized the 1st Union Army Regiment of Colored Soldiers in September 1862. And that is 2 minutes. Next comment is by Justin B. Schmidt. I'm curious as to why Dr. Thomas Adams and Ms. Suzanne Juliette Mobley do not appear on the initial report dated November 30th, 2020. This is particularly problematic as Ms. Mobley is also a commissioner on the City Planning Commission and will be able to have an input in that forum. Does no one see this as a conflict?
Hi, I'd like to respond directly to that. Dr. Thomas Adams and I are not members of this commission. We are part of the panel of experts that support this commission. There are 44 scholars from 15 colleges and universities and 3 archival institutions who've contributed to our report. But because we are not commission members, we do not contribute to the commission's report, nor are we library employees who released that report. In terms of the City Planning Commission, obviously, due to the conflict and within Louisiana Ethics Code, I will be recusing myself from all debate, discussion, and voting on this topic. Thanks.
I don't think I have anything to respond, but what Sue said.
Thank you for clarifying that, Sue and Thomas.
Okay, next comment is by David Delgado. I would like to submit a bike lane name, New Orleans Jazz Bike Lane. Next comment is by Beth and Robert Mason. We strongly urge the commission to rededicate Palmer Avenue to the long overlooked and frankly underappreciated drummer Earl Palmer. He was the backbeat of the city and is credited with the very first of giving rock and roll the beat and sound that ultimately took the world by storm. He is another example of a son of New Orleans who has never received recognition anywhere in his home city, a tragedy. Next comment is by Elaine Leda. This is an excellent report. About Palmer Park being named for Judge Wisdom? No. Ellis Marcellus lived in this neighborhood on Hickory Street. His funeral is here at Mater de la Rosa, and the park should be renamed for him. The U.S. Court of Appeals building is named after Judge Wisdom already. All the other recommendations are very good in my opinion, especially Tulane Avenue changing to Tudy Montana Avenue, Leah Chase Circle, and Governor Nichols to Lolis E. Alley Street. Great work and happy to Gwendolyn Midlow Hall's involvement. Thank you all. Next comment is Robert Garda. Please do not rename Palmer Avenue. Instead, please consider rededicating it to Earl Palmer, a famous New Orleans musician, or Vernon Palmer, a world-renowned civil law scholar at LSU. Next comment is by Suzanne Rather. The city of New Orleans deserves to have its streets named in honor of those who worked to create a thriving community. Renaming our streets will help remove the glorification of lost cause mentality and allow our residents to see their histories reflected in public spaces. We have an incredible history full of BIPOC leaders who need to be recognized and taught about in the community. Next comment is George Schmidt. Rename the entire city. The Duc d'Orleans, I believe that's Duc d'Orleans. The Duc d'Orleans was a slaveholder. I would recommend renaming it after the Colapisa Indians who lived in perfect harmony with the ecology. It could be called Colapisa City and the citizens Colapisites. Next comment is by Jill Turia. Especially pleased that a musician is so honored. Next comment is by Kathy Carmouche. Murders, carjackings, armed robberies every day in New Orleans. The people of New Orleans are not safe at any time. Police services are being cut due to the city's lack of finances. How is it possible that public funds are being spent on changing street names? I have asked about the estimated cost to taxpayers and received no reply. Please direct public funds to protecting the people of New Orleans, fixing the impassable streets, and making New Orleans a safe and clean place for residents and visitors. Next comment is by Anton Malco. This is to express my support for the renaming commission. It is a positive process to review the figures who stand as symbols for the citizenry. Next comment is by Val Cupid. Not sure which agenda item this would fall under, so I picked up. Our cross streets are all named after Mexican-American war heroes. Walker Mouton Lane should definitely be removed from your list. All were Mexican-American war heroes and had nothing to do with said ordinance that we are discussing. Before any name is considered for Bragg or Robert E. Lee, I would like the historic facts to be corrected first. Bragg and Robert E. Lee were the only ones that crossed over to the War of 1861 and 1865. I believe more time is needed for input from the residents of said two streets and keeping it synonymous with other streets in the area. Robert E. Lee renamed to New Basin Canal Boulevard, I feel would be the best choice in keeping with the historic and relevance of the area. The next comment is by Bruce Hofer. He's already commented, but technically this is on a separate agenda item. We all have to work together to balance the legitimate goal of redressing the past injustice and associated with slavery with the real impact that the commission's goals have on our residents. If you simply force change in an agenda-driven, heavy-handed way, then the commission is abusing its power and stated purpose to right wrongs of the past, just as slave owners abused the rights of indentured blacks. While none of us know why Palmer was named Palmer, and we don't even care, now that your expert panel has determined that we should be offended by Reverend Palmer, we are offended in that context. But again, nobody cares or cared about Reverend Palmer, believe me. You may care, but we don't. However, we agree with you that it is not appropriate for our street to be named in honor of Reverend Palmer. The question is, how do you right the wrong? Everyone with a stake in the outcome has to be involved in the solution, but especially the current residents of the city who are being punished for the sins committed against people we never knew by people we never knew. Why is that fair? You will cause more resentment than you will ever know by pushing cram-down tactics onto your citizens. And this is across the board, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian. Look at the total rejection of the mayor's tax plan a few weeks ago. When you tread on us, we know what it's like to lose freedom. When you don't tell us the truth, we resent it and don't like it. Everyone feels that way, Black, white, Hispanic, and Asian. The next comment is by Benton Smallpage. I do not agree with the entire idea of affecting New Orleans citizens in 2020 for common and accepted thoughts in the 19th century. We all agree that racial injustice were common in these days, but that is not our sentiment now. Few people on Palmer Avenue or anywhere else in New Orleans know who Mr. Palmer was or represented. Changing the name will not bring any justice to oppressed people, only inconvenience moderate citizens. That being said, I support the idea of rededicating Palmer Avenue to Earl Palmer. That way, modern citizens can honor a local cultural icon and not have to upend our daily lives. This is what I consider to be an amicable solution to not a problem, but a sentiment that has recently been brought to the forefront. Forcing things on people in this day and age is suggesting the same sentiment that we are trying to retract from history. Next comment is by Michael Bruce. Please consider renaming the current Capitol Street for Dr. Louis Charles Rudenay, founder of the New Orleans Tribune. Next comment is by Ileana Suquet. I'm a resident of Palmer Avenue. I would like to advocate for the rededication of Palmer Avenue to honor the memory of Earl Palmer, who is a New Orleanian and member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. His accomplishments were legendary, and what better way to honor him and his family than to have this street named in his honor. The more I read about him and the significance of his work in music and how it influenced modern music, the more I am in favor of commemorating his life and celebrating with his progeny his genius. We have been so blessed all along to have him as the son of our city, and it would be an honor to attend the dedication to celebrate his life. I cannot imagine a more worthy candidate. This is a comment renaming Calhoun Street. I am 65 years old. This comment is by Verdalee Springer. This is a comment in regard to renaming Calhoun Street. I am 65 years old. Many years ago, my grandfather, an immigrant, came to this country at 11 years of age. He settled in Lucier, Louisiana, worked hard, married, eventually moved to New Orleans, and bought a plot of land on Calhoun Street. He gave this land to my father as a wedding gift. My father and mother built a home on Calhoun Street, had 6 children, and lived the rest of their lives on Calhoun Street. The home was passed to me. I realize and understand that this street was named after John Calhoun, who defended slavery, which cannot be defended in our world. He died in 1850, more than 150 years ago. I can tell you this, when I speak or hear of Calhoun Street, I do not think of John Calhoun ever. But I do think of my family history, my ancestors, my home, my little slice of history. Please do not take it away from me or from all the other folks who may have similar connections. Verdalee Springer. The next comment is by Richard Hobson. I support renaming street after Rudenay. Next comment is by Lenora Gobert. Regarding street renaming, I strongly urge that Dr. Louis Charles Rudenay should be included as one of the people to replace current signage. He was a strong civil rights leader and advocate for justice and equality at a time that was so much more dangerous for people of color than any time in the present. Review his history and you'll see he will be considered and named as one of the people to replace current signage. Next comment is by Catherine Wheeler. One monument has not been addressed is the McDonough Live Oak in City Park. The street is over 300 years old and has nothing to do with McDonough. It should not bear his name. Next comment is by Philip Marino. Please try to include the renaming of Catherine Avenue to Fats Domino Boulevard in today's discussion. This was mentioned years ago and seems to have fallen by the wayside with current events. Let's remember with respect and honor one of the greatest music legends. The next comment is by Clifton E. Majou III. The street naming commission is trying to change the look and feel of the historic New Orleans. The gumbo in New Orleans makes it our home. History should not be erased. Some is good and some is bad, but it's what makes the city rich with history. I am not opposed to a few predominant public places, parks, and streets being changed, but most of the streets, parks, and public places should not be lost. There should be a balance. The next comment is Allie Morrison. As a lifelong resident of New Orleans and recent homeowner on Palmer Avenue, I was deeply saddened to hear about the potential name change of our street. I only ever associated Palmer with lovely Oakline Road housing folks from all walks of lives, from Tulane students and professors to children and hardworking young adults like myself. The people that live on the street are proud of it just as they are proud New Orleanians. That being said, I'm not proud to have learned the true denotation behind the name Palmer. To me, it was always just a name, a word. In fact, I have always liked the name Palmer. In general, I have friends and relatives named Palmer. It's a nice name and doesn't need to continue to carry the same meaning it once did. Let's redirect the denotation of Palmer Avenue to instead denote the great Earl Palmer, a famous Black New Orleans musician, who I only learned about through this commission's efforts. Let's educate the public on this rededicated street names association because he deserves to be more widely known. I would be proud to continue to live on a street called Palmer Avenue in representation of Mr. Earl's achievements and incredible musical accomplishments. Thank you all for your work and thoughtful consideration. Next comment is by Robin McDowell. Finish the job. Remove all statutes of exploiters and oppressors, take them all down, commit to the rest, which are well over 200. 2, drop all charges against the 2 individuals accused of removing the John McDonough bus. The city's accusations are not only false, but maliciously inflated to both punish and make an example of these young people. It would seem that this is the same spirit of colonial governments who prosecuted, tortured, and publicly hanged Black people. 3, instead of using city and tax dollars to prosecute young people in court, flip the city budget, fund resources for children, families, and living wage job development for workers, not police salaries, resources, and sham reforms, so they can continue to inflict violence upon innocent citizens. 4, instead of congratulating, elevating, and privileging the representation and affiliates of big oil and global banking on this commission, stop giving tax exemptions to corporations. The city is squeezing the working class people dry, even sentencing them to death, such as residents of Gordon Plaza who live on toxic soil, deemed the second highest cancer-causing area in the entire state of Louisiana. Tax corporations to fully fund their rightful relocation. Next comment is by Kirk Bergeron. 4 points I would like to make. Costs to change and install signs, changing New Orleans history, drop new maps with name changes, and the people should vote on this and not just the city council. The next comment is by Heidi Nickel. On renaming the streets, New Orleans is rich in history and we should keep it that way. No one can erase history, and the cost to change signs and install new ones are much too great. The people should make that decision, not just the council. The next comment is Regine Richter McLean. I would just like to express my support for the removal of some of the old street names. It is high time that there is a higher awareness in the city of people who have done a great job and done a great deal to improve equal justice. Renee is just one example. I would see his name on a street sign or in the near future. The next comment is by Charles Marsala. 2 days from today, other matters. 2 days from today, December 18th, is the anniversary of the official adopting into the Constitution the 13th Amendment. Although during the Civil War, slaves were freed specifically in southern states, slavery remained legal in several Union states. On December 18th, 1865, the Union states of Delaware, New Jersey, and California were forced to end slavery. However, modern-day slavery still exists in America, and over 40 million are still in slavery worldwide. Let us remain motivated to end slavery and to provide shelter from those in New Orleans and Louisiana who are escaping human trafficking. Next comment is by Mary Madeline. Of the myriad blessings New Orleans, our transplanted family most enjoy the loving and cooperative spirit of our neighbors and the "we're all in this together" modus operandi and practical decision-making local governments. The Palmer Avenue residents exhibit all of the above with its deep and serious response to the city's ill-advised effort to rename our streets. Our solution honors a local award-winning musician, Earl Palmer, as both genius and quintessentially New Orleans. I join my thoughtful and democratically minded neighbors in rejecting the city's rejection of our solution to a problem that they're making. How failing to honor a local musical giant will help resolve an issue not one single resident of Palmer Avenue has, or every will have, is a travesty of what we expect of freely elected city representation. The next comment is by Tracy Armitage. As a resident, business, and building owner of Sophie B. Wright Place, we understand and appreciate the step forward to rename our street. We are part of a small and tight-knit community of neighbors and small businesses on the short street and feel strongly about our street identity. We are concerned to hear that our street will be renamed John Jack Nelson Place. We have deep respect and gratitude for the civil rights work of Mr. Nelson, but we would like to suggest a different approach to renaming Sophie B. Wright Place. Rather than continuing to name streets after people and figures in history, we believe that creating a more expansive name that gives all people a sense of identity and place on the street would be more welcome and a necessary change. We would like to offer that the street name instead be short, more supportive of small businesses attracting customers and clients, recognizable, increases a sense of identity among neighbors and visitors alike, neutral, which renaming process is due to the flawed nature of human beings. We would like to suggest a name in honor of any of the following: native plants of Louisiana, colors, music-related terms, and/or aspirational words that embody the work and legacy of many people that we honor for their positive impact on the world, such as John Jack Nelson. Thank you for your time and consideration of our request. We urge your commission to revisit the naming of Sophie B. Wright Place and consider the input and wishes of its residents. Please reach out to us with any questions or concerns. The next comment is from Ms. Giovanna Joseph. Good morning. I am writing to support the renaming of Capitol Street to that of beloved physician and newspaper pioneer, Dr. Louis Charles Roudanez. The day I learned of this 19th century free man of color and how his physicians' work and newspapers were instrumental in the fight for freedom and voting rights remains one of the great days of my life. After learning of him from his grandson, Mark Roudanez, I was later amazed to see my ancestral surnames listed among his medical patients and among signatures that included Dr. Roudanez on the 1864 petition to the President Lincoln, demanding voting rights for all after the war. Too many years have gone by with this man in the shadows of history. I have been so moved by his story that in 2018, I wrote an opera for our city's tricentennial with Dr. Roudanez as his main character. The lines of Reconstruction, Les Lions de la Reconstruction, from Black Codes to the ballot box, opened the eyes of many New Orleanians to the work of the 19th century free people of color, especially Dr. Roudanez. Although my company, Opera Creole, received an award from Gambit's Classical Arts Awards for creating this work, the great honor was just to be able to tell their lost stories. In 2019, as we stood on the stage in Washington, D.C. area performing the opera, holding up replica of the petition signed by Dr. Roudanez and taken to Lincoln by his brother Jean-Baptiste Roudanez and Arthur Bottineau, was an incredible circular moment. The next comment is by Mark Roudanez. At the November 24th meeting, Judge Lamel was recommended by the Commission for renaming Capitol Street. Lamel was quickly approved without discussion. Ivan Lamel has an admirable record as district judge, but he was not recommended anywhere in the report. Reference final report, page 85 to 90. Recommendations: Roudanez, Charles, Ortiz. Lamel is, I believe, the only person nominated by the CCSRC who is still alive. The City Planning Commission's naming policy states, in order to reduce any perception of misconduct, favoritism, or bias, no street shall be renamed to honor a person who has been deceased for no less than 5 years. The CCSRC could seek a waiver for Lamel, but I respectfully request the commissioners to reconsider and nominate Roudanez based on his extraordinary merits and final report recommendations. The next comment is by Marcella Prince. Please rename Robert E. Lee Boulevard, Carmel Boulevard, to honor the Sisters of Mount Carmel, who came to the city from France in 1833 to minister to orphans, to victims of disease, abuse, and poverty, and to educate free young ladies of color, and whose mission of educating young women continues to this day, continues today on the street. In the early 1920s, when they outgrew the original quarters of General Nichols Street, the sisters looked to the lake areas where the land was cheap because 10 years earlier it was a mosquito-infested swamp, and was now an inconvenient train ride away from the city and still lacked water, gas, and electricity. These sisters were true pioneers, bravely motivated by their unselfish desire to expand their order's mission. In 1925, they built a 4-story convent, which provided a residence for the sisters, a day in boarding school to novitiate and normal school to train teachers. The presence of the sisters to Mount Carmel and their large 4-story convent in this frontier outpost in the 1920s was a true catalyst for the development of this undesirable outer edge of the city. The Sisters of Mount Carmel quietly and unselfishly care for and improve the lives of so many New Orleanians of all backgrounds and situations over the last 2 centuries, and ask for nothing in return, and including attention or fame. It is incumbent upon us to finally recognize their contributions to the city over the last 2 centuries by naming the street upon which they bravely ventured out to build and expand their mission on the edge of the swamp and are present today. Thank you. Next comment is by K. Brad Ott. In reviewing proposed street names and proposed public space renamings, I am shocked and dismayed the two great human rights activists and New Orleans political leaders are overlooked, Dorothy May Taylor and Johnny Jackson Jr., in addition to the posted street renamings. I propose renaming North and South Claiborne Avenues for Dorothy May Taylor and Jackson Avenue for Johnny Jackson Jr. These two iconic leaders have to be recognized and venerated for the lifelong commitments to civil and human rights. For the stakeholder engagement process, notice of virtual hearings with active URLs need to be made available to affected communities at least 2 weeks in advance. Also, maps posted on websites need to be updated, e.g. proposed renamings yet to be announced, Algiers proposed renamings of the Bermans Avenue, Highway, Place, and Park. In general, I support the effort to rid New Orleans public spaces of veneration to Confederate and Jim Crow supporters and white supremacists. Yes, this effort must not overlook Dorothy May Taylor and Johnny Jackson Jr., and this renaming process may be made fully transparent, engaging with the wider public. K. Brad Ott. The next comment is by David Kemper Jr. Please don't. I actually grew up on Calhoun Street. My parents still live there. Seems like this commission ignores the actual citizens on the ground for the sake of the narrative. On the bright side, of all the spam mail for me still sent to my parents will get lost in the shuffle. If you are to go through with the names, can we please consider dropping full names and honorifics and just go with surnames? Twomey Street would require a lot smaller street line than Father Louis J. Twomey Street, SJ. Dr. Linda Kirby, please do not rename Kirby Street, or Calhoun Street. I have owned my home for 20 years and my daughter grew up in my home. It will do no good to rename the street, just cause fun. Thank you. Beverly McKenna. Without question, we at the Modern Day New Orleans Tribune are disheartened to learn that Dr. Louis Charles rename name, so high on the list of those recommended, has been supplanted by another in the city street renaming process. We cannot think of another New Orleanian more deserving of having a street named in his honor than Dr. Rudenay. Surely there is no one living amongst us who is more worthy. We know very well the contributions Dr. Rudenay made to our city, state, and nation as a physician, newspaper publisher, and civil rights activist. In fact, our newspaper, the Modern Day New Orleans Tribune, was founded in 1985 to honor and in the spirit of Dr. Rudenay, who championed the cause of civil rights for Black people, both free and enslaved, through the pages of his newspapers and in the work he did throughout the community. We strongly urge his committee to reconsider Dr. Louis Charles Rudenay's name for what is now Capitol Street, as it explores renaming streets and other public places in New Orleans. Dr. Dwight and Beverly McKenna, publishers for New Orleans Tribune. The next comment is Camelia Moses Opudu. I am responding to the renaming of streets. I support the renaming of streets. This isn't the first time that a town or city has taken the effort to be proactive in renaming an area that has been named, that has a name that is marred by stigma and hurtful memories. In 1888, in Virginia, the city of Jerusalem was renamed Portland. The name was changed because in August of 1831, Nat Turner's revolt took place. The General Assembly took the opportunity to rename and rebound the city so that when it was named, people didn't think about the historic events that were not memories of joy, but regret and hurt. I think the same logic should be used in renaming and taking away the names that are associated with the lost cause of the Confederacy. Instead of glorifying the dehumanizing leaders of the lost cause, let's rename these streets and not continue to give honor to the treasonous leaders that glorified the fake KKK and other relics of hate, in particular slavery. If the citizens of Jerusalem, VA, Virginia, in 1888 could recognize the importance of not having their town forever associated with Nat Turner's revolt, then I hope the commissioners in New Orleans can see the importance of this need in 2020. Let's not continue to mainstream these names. Let's recognize the disparaging ideology these names symbolize and get rid of them. We have an opportunity to transform the future by correcting the past. Let us be bold. The next comment is by Edward Brown. The future will always outweigh the past. This process is so important for the future of New Orleans and the future of America and for what America actually stands. I would love to see the result of this process as a celebration of those and that which has brought us together, rather than an identification of those who were powerful at one point in time. The next comment is by Bart Everson. I support this process because names are important. Names are powerful. The names we chose enshrine certain values. There's no two ways about it. Personally, I think naming public spaces after human beings is not the best practice, no matter how noble those people may have been. I prefer other naming conventions. See, for example, the wonderful city streets named after trees. However, naming public spaces after people actively supported, redeemed, and fought for systems of white supremacy and enslavement is an affront to the dignity of all humans and embarrassment to the city. Change those names with all due haste. And the final comment is from Donna Flowers. I have lived on Calhoun Street for over 50 years, and I'm very concerned over the idea of renaming my street. Few Calhoun Street residents even know who Calhoun was, and none have had anything to do with naming the street. It is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous burden on residents. Time and money can be much better spent. Our city has so many more important issues to address that really can make a difference in people's lives. The time and money that will be needed to make these street changes should be used to fix potholes and fight crime. Thank you for taking these ideas into consideration. And that is all the public comment that was received during the public comment period.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Greatly appreciate that. I hope that we haven't strained your voice too much. But all these comments were very necessary for us to hear. We will take this input and study it more closely as we move toward writing our final report. Question from any of the commissioners regarding this last section? Questions or comments, I should say. There was a wide-ranging group of opinions, some informed, some not as informed about the process, but we really appreciate everyone's opinion, and we will take into account these statements. So hearing no comments from the commissioners, I will move to item 9, which is adjournment. If there is no further business, we have concluded our agenda, and I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you all. Thank you, Andrew.
Appreciate your patience, commissioners.
Thanks, Andrew. Good
Thank
night.
you very much.
Good
to the
night,
staff
everybody.
And also to our experts.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Susan, Thomas, and Carl.
All right. Good night, guys.